Chapter 10:20. Soren was planning something. But while he was plotting something, the Queen of Spiders, who was far away in the Underdark, also began to move. The evil goddess began to tighten the giant net she had woven and gradually targeted the main god of the elves. The anger of revenge had been accumulating in her heart for a long time. She was so eager to take revenge on her former husband, the main god of the elves, Corlon Larishan. The Avatar Crisis was a stage. The first to appear on this stage was the human god system, because humans had the largest number and were most widely distributed in the world. But with the transition of the Avatar Crisis, the gods of other races began to gradually appear. Shortly after the outbreak of the undead, a god system that was not very rare in the material plane began to gradually appear. That was the dwarf god system. Dwarves were popular craftsmen, alchemists, and inventors. Although their technology was recognized, most dwarves still liked to live with their own kind in comfortable caves under the hills where animals were abundant. Dwarves liked animals, beautiful gems, and all kinds of jokes. They had a sense of humor and loved puns, jokes, games, and even pranks. The more complicated the design, the better. Fortunately, dwarves were as invested in craftsmanship as they were in pranks. Dwarves liked to ask questions and discover things through personal experience. Sometimes they were reckless. Curiosity made dwarves skilled engineers because they were always looking for new ways to build things. Sometimes, the gnomes would set up a prank just to see how the others would react. This was a group of naughty little guys. Many people would mistake them for halflings, but in fact, halflings were much taller than dwarves. Dwarves were only about 1 to 1 meter tall and weighed between 40 and 60 pounds. Their skin color was dark brown to wood brown, they had blonde hair, and their eyes were different shades of blue. Males liked carefully trimmed short beards. Dwarves usually wore clothes of animal skin or earth tones, with intricate embroidery or delicate jewelry. Dwarves reached adulthood at about 40 years old and could live up to 350 years old, but some could live up to 500 years old. This was a long-lived race. Because of their individual strength and height, dwarves did not often walk in many cities. They only liked to deal with dwarves and halflings, and they got along quite well. Only a small number of gnomes would leave the settlement and go to human cities, and these gnomes were often more dangerous. Because of some wars in the past, many humans had never seen a gnome in their entire lives. Only in the territories of dwarves and halflings would they encounter one. The dwarves didn't like the visit of humans, and the halflings had closed off the Shire. Therefore, since the outbreak of the Avatar Crisis, there was not much news about the dwarves. Gnomes lived in the wooded hills of the southeast. Although they lived underground, gnomes went out to breathe fresh air more often than dwarves and enjoyed outdoor activities. The dwarves hid their homes with ingenious architectural structures and illusions. Only welcomed visitors would be guided to the bright and warm caves, and those who were not welcomed would not be able to enter. They liked to use illusions to disguise their homes. The main god of the gnomes was Garzhanjan, a main god who grew slowly over time. His history was as long as the birth of the gnomes. Grey Feather Hills. This was one of the territories of the gnomes. They only occupied a small part of the material plane and did not leave their land much. However, these gnomes had escaped the first few Avatar crises, but after the outbreak of the undead disaster, they still suffered a lot of impact. But these were not the most important things. The more important thing was related to a god. He was Shuguzan, the great earth-caller, gnome god of death and nature. As mentioned before, many of the clergies had long been divided, and the clergies of different races were given the power of some new gods. After a long time, the gnomes also had their own god of death, that was Shuguzan, the great earth-caller. He lived on the edge of the underworld in the lower plane, and was responsible for assisting Klemvox in managing the dead, but he was mainly responsible for the souls of the gnomes. This was a god with mid-level divine power. Shuguzan, the great earth-caller, mastered the clergies of earth, nature, and the dead. These were all very powerful clergies, and they also allowed him to successfully advance to mid-level divine power. At this moment, near a gnome village in the Grey Feather Hills, a dense crowd of undead surrounded the place. The gnomes did not have many big cities. They lived relatively scattered, and the temples of the gods were mostly at the level of temples. This village worshipped Shiguzan, the great earth caller, the gnome god of death and nature. In the darkness, a pair of unruly eyes watched everything. These resurrected undead surrounded the place. Unlike other undead, they were directly controlled by a powerful demigod lich. The power of death. Sirik silently looked at the village in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Destroy this place. I want to seize the power in the temple." "Yes, master." The demigod lich nodded and retreated. Soon, the undead launched a crazy attack. Without any support, the gnomes in front of them were defeated, and soon hundreds of them were killed. The fall of the entire village was only a matter of time. About half an hour later, this gnome village was sacrificed, and then all the gnomes were killed and resurrected as undead. Sirik's figure appeared behind the undead. Compared to when he first broke out of the seal, he was much stronger. At least, he had the power of a weak divine power. He came to the temple of the village and then entered the temple alone. Soon, the brilliance of the temple gradually dimmed, and the power of death gradually disappeared, as if it was swallowed by some existence. There were only 2 temples in the whole village. One was dedicated to Bar Ivan, the shadow cloak, gnome god of spies, and the other was dedicated to Shiguzan, the great earth caller, gnome god of death and nature. Master. Just as Sirik walked out of the temple, a hazy shadow appeared. This was a promoted assassin, and the most terrible assassin had the ability of permanent invisibility. They were promoted by the god who held the clergy of murder, and were endowed with the special ability of permanent invisibility. They were also once the core members of the Sirik church. The assassin approached quietly, knelt down and said, "We have found traces of Bar Ivan, the shadow cloak. But we also found traces of Garrido, the Iron Hand, gnome god of war. They seem to have appeared together near the Grey Feather Hills for some reason." Sirik turned his head and laughed as if he was sneering. He said, "The gnome god of war? So the gnomes have a god of war. Continue to monitor their movements. When my power recovers a little, I will kill them all." According to normal thinking, Sirik's target should not be the gnome god system, but the human god system of death. However, Sirik held the clergy of conspiracy. He did not know why, when he targeted the human god system, he always had a kind of uneasiness, as if he had fallen into a conspiracy. In the end, he decided to follow the instinct of the clergy. Although Sirik was crazy, he was not an idiot. His intuition told him that if he targeted the human god system, he might fall into a conspiracy. Therefore, Sirik took advantage of this disaster of the undead and secretly controlled some liches to target an inconspicuous race. That was, the gnomes who lived in the hills in the southeast. A divine system that was not very powerful, but had at least 3 or more gods as a target. More importantly, there was one more thing. So far, the gnome god Gar, dazzling gold, had not appeared. Sirik suspected that the gnome god was still in his kingdom and did not dare to come down. If the gods with great divine power were to resist desperately, they could hold on until the last wave of the Avatar crisis before they fell to the mortal world. However, doing so would consume more divine power. The harder they resisted, the weaker they would be when they fell to the mortal world. P.S. I still remember the ID photo update of a reader in Undefeated Legend last time. The game is in beta today. After I finish this chapter, I will enter the game to see if there is a similar ID this time. Chapter 10:21. Under the cover of the night. A camp was hidden in the mountains, and a group of gloomy-looking magi were gathered here. They had special emblems on their chests and used various disguises to protect themselves. Their true identities were members of the Dragon Witch cult. It was an ancient and evil organization. Its founder was Sam Astor, a chosen of the goddess of magic. He had some dealings with Elminster and once fought with Alistair, the city lord of Silvery Moon. It was worth mentioning that the former city lord of Silvery Moon was his lover. This terrifying sorcerer eventually went crazy and revived as a lich. In order to destroy this terrifying existence, hundreds of priests of the god of dawn, the former god of light, tried to stop Samaster, but they were forced into a corner by the powerful Samaster. Helpless, the priests sacrificed their lives to pray for Luoshander to descend. The god of dawn responded to the prayers of his followers and sent his avatar to destroy Samaster. Samaster's all-out attack only managed to break the skin of Luoshander's temporary body, but his own body was destroyed by Luoshander's attack. An existence comparable to a demigod lich was thus erased by the former god of light. However, the organization he created was preserved and maintained its vitality. Because of this, the Dragon Witch cult and the Dragon cult were created. As time passed, the members of this cult gradually got closer to the god of liches and maintained some contact with Naruto. They were also the most terrifying part of the undead disaster, because their mission was to revive the Dragon Lich. An evil aura pervaded the mountain range. The members of the Dragon Witch cult worshipped dragons, but not living ones. Instead, they were transformed into dragon liches after they died. Samaster had recorded the secrets of creating dragon liches in his book, The Tower of the Dragon. Now, copies of this book were circulated among the members of the Dragon Witch cult. Rituals usually involved the cooperation of the evil dragon and the sorcerers of the Dragon Witch cult. However, it was said that the more powerful sorcerers of the Dragon Witch cult would also force the evil dragon to undergo this transformation. At this moment, in the depths of the mountains, an old blue dragon had been placed in a large magic circle. The transformation of a dragon lich was a very complicated process. It required many magic tools and expensive items. After the transformation, the dragon lich would form a cooperative relationship with the members of the Dragon Witch cult. They would act together against the enemy. A hazy silhouette arrived. Soren's avatar appeared in the mountains. He sneaked past the traps and approached the Dragon Witch cult's camp. As expected, it has already begun. The initial attack of the undead calamity relied on a large number of creatures to wear down the living beings. However, the ghouls and skeleton soldiers alone were unable to truly threaten the gods. To ensure that his plan was perfect, apart from the undead lords, Naruto also secretly supported the members of the Dragon Witch cult. He sent his priests to join them, secretly teaching them necromancy spells and using them to resurrect the Dragon Lich and the Bone Dragon. This mountain range was the territory of the Blue Dragon. There weren't many dragons in the material plane, but there should be at least a few hundred of them. The Blue Dragons occupied this land because it was close to the Gobi Desert. There were more than 10 blue dragons gathered here because there was a gem mine here. The messy goblins were scattered around the perimeter. The old blue dragon controlled these goblins and used the bugbears as guards to protect the periphery of the nest. He then controlled them to mine the gems here. The aura of death gradually gathered. At the top of a mountain, an evil spell was taking effect. With a low chant, a member of the Dragon Witch cult in a black robe brought a strange potion to the blue dragon. It was a bottle of deadly poison. It would kill an adult dragon in no time. The moment the potion killed the dragon, the spell circle would automatically activate and the dragon's soul would be injected into the phylactery. The birth of a dragon lich was terrifying. This creature had a challenge rating of 23 and above. Even normal Baylor demons wouldn't be able to defeat it. Disciples, cheer! The Dragon Witch cult member who seemed to be the leader said excitedly, "Welcome back, our friend." The powerful dragon lich, Durgos. As the blue dragon swallowed the potion, its life force quickly disappeared. Then, the spell circle on the ground shone brightly. In Soren's vision, the soul of a dragon appeared and entered the phylactery. The power of death gathered. The blue dragon's body decayed at a speed visible to the naked eye and quickly turned into a half-skeletal dragon. Its flesh and blood dissipated with the spell, and the old blue dragon successfully turned into a dragon lich. A little bit of soul fire appeared in its huge eye sockets. It seems that they're very skilled at turning into a dragon lich. Soren silently watched all of this. At the same time, he calculated the strength of the last few waves of the undead calamity based on what he saw. The outbreak of the undead calamity was only the prelude. Currently, the resurrected were low-level undead and refugees who starved to death during the Avatar crisis. At most, they would be turned into skeleton warriors and ghouls. However, Naruto's goal was not these. As the first wave of the undead calamity ended, more powerful undead would gradually appear, and the Dragon Lich would be the most important one. Currently, there were many members of the Dragon Witch cult scattered throughout the material plane. They were either coercing or forcibly turning the dragons into dragon liches. Naruto's Grim Reaper's servants were assisting these people. Dragon liches could not only be transformed from pure-blooded dragons. According to Soren's memories, Naruto taught the Dragon Witch cult other methods so that they could even transform mixed-blood dragons into dragon liches. For example, old pterosaurs, wyverns, white dragons, and so on. The members of the Dragon Witch cult were mainly distributed in the east and north. The eastern desert was occupied by the evil blue dragon, while the cold lands of the north had a large number of wyverns and white dragons. Nero's church controlled a group of necromancers, and after using the undead to attract attention at the beginning, they had already begun to quietly prepare to revive the giant dragon. The War of the Dragons should be starting soon. Soren watched the old blue dragon in front of him completely turn into a dragon lich. He had no intention of doing anything because this operation was not for a dragon lich. He was looking for the god of liches. The War of the Dragons broke out in the late stage of the undead disaster. The outbreak of the war was mainly related to the Dragon Witch cult. Many pure-blooded dragons, especially those of the good alignment, could not tolerate the other party's resurrection of the dragon liches and desecrated the long sleep of the dragons. So in the end, even the dragon islands of other worlds had dragons joining the battle. However, the main force of the whole battle was still the good gold dragons and silver dragons. Most of them lived near the Elven Kingdom. This battle finally attracted a legendary dragon. It was one of the 3 legendary dragon species, the Power Dragon. This legendary dragon fought with Naruto head-on and did not die. It only escaped with serious injuries. Soren waited quietly. According to the information he found, the god of liches had encountered the goddess of death and magic not long ago. His body was destroyed by this otherworldly god. Although he was resurrected with a new body, his strength must have been affected. According to the information collected by Mordor City, his core followers were here. The camp in front of him was a secret gathering place of the Dragon Witch cult. In his previous life, it was a large dungeon that had destroyed many people, and there was a certain chance of encountering the god of liches. Soren estimated that there was a 30% chance that the god of liches would appear here. There were about 3 dragon liches, 1 legendary necromancer, 2 legendary mages of the Dragon Witch cult, and more than 100 members of the Dragon Witch cult. The most powerful one was the blue dragon lich that had just turned, and the other 2 were old subspecies of dragons that had turned into liches. Just as Soren was secretly observing everything, a sudden movement attracted his attention. Then, in Soren's perception, a beautiful mature woman with long silver hair appeared outside the camp. She quietly lurked and approached here, as if she wanted to spy on the situation of the dragon lich's camp. This is her. Soren seemed to have thought of something, and the corner of his mouth could not help but show a playful smile. He did not expect to meet an acquaintance of his previous life here, and it was someone who had been chasing after him for a long time. The reason was that after Soren came out of the Underdark, he was a little short of money, so he went to her nest to steal some valuable things. The mature woman with long silver hair used magic to cover her tracks, and then quietly bypassed the bugbear goblin that was guarding the camp. She did not realize that Soren was secretly observing her. She just carefully approached because her current form was not suitable for fighting, at least she could not use all of her strength. This evil aura. The mature and charming woman secretly observed the camp, and as if she felt something, she murmured, "It really is a dragon lich. These evil guys are actually making dragon liches. No. This matter must be reported to others." Faint clouds lingered. The woman with long silver hair in front of him quickly disappeared, and then gradually retreated outside the camp. However, at this time, a cold voice suddenly sounded, "Since you are here, don't be in a hurry to leave. Am I right? Guess what I saw? A sneaky little silver dragon. How dare it lurk in our territory? A gloomy aura. A figure holding a white bone staff appeared, and looked at the woman in front of him with a playful gaze, and said playfully, "Looks like we have one more material." This was the camp of the Dragon Witch cult. A large-scale battle with a challenge rating of around 25, where thousands of adventurers had fallen. Chapter 1022. Silver Dragon, Alexandrina. An adult dragon who lived near the Cloud Mountains. She had a group of maids made up of cloud giants. She liked to go to the human countries and was quite popular among the elves. In Soren's memory of his previous life, she was a mobile quest distributor in the middle of the Avatar crisis. As long as one was in the good camp, it was always easy to receive a variety of quests from her. Because this naughty silver dragon was a member of a hidden organization in the material plane, the Harpist. The Harpist was a very loose secret and contradictory organization. Its leaders were unknown and its internal composition was very complicated. They were always hidden in the shadows, only at the critical point of the situation, and immediately disappeared into the crowd after completing the task. They fought against evil in some seemingly insignificant and even somewhat deviant ways, but the general good people did not understand them. Some people claim that we are spies, and others think that we are nosy dangerous people or unquestioning assassins. In fact, we are the collection of every characteristic of these people, if the situation proves that it is appropriate to do so. Non-evil people of any age, profession, or race could become a harpist: humans, half-elves, elves, some halflings, dwarves, and highly intelligent forest dwellers, such as forest fairies and centaurs. The first three accounted for the majority of the harpist. Most of these people were bards or rangers. Other professions also had a place, whether it was mages, thieves, or priests. Droll was an ally of the harpist, but many priests were proud to be a harpist. This was a very old organization, whose history could be traced back to before the last Avatar crisis. The harpist had existed as early as the time when the three gods of death were active. The harpist was once called the interference of the material plane and deranged idealists, but in most cases, they were a group of people who acted with good intentions. Alexandrina was one of the leaders of the Southern Harpist. She was keen to fight against evil forces and liked to release a variety of quests to adventurers. Soren once dared to steal some valuable things from her lair, and because of this, he was on the Harpist's wanted list. This organization had weakened a lot, but it still had a lot of influence. Jia. A black mist appeared, and with the fluctuation of magic, a lich holding a silver-gray staff appeared in front of him. He looked at the silver dragon in front of him and said in a deep voice, "What did I see?" "Silver dragon, Alexandrina. Why didn't you obediently stay in the Cloud Mountain range? Why did you come here to die?" The high-ranking members of the Dragon Witch cult appeared one after another. They looked at Alexandrina with ill intentions. Evil Dragon Witch disciples. Being surrounded by so many fallen wizards, Silver Dragon Alexandrina's face did not look good. She said in a serious tone, "You actually dare to secretly resurrect a Dracolic. Other kind people would never allow such behavior." The harpist never lacked a sense of justice. Soren complained as he hid in the dark. As a member of the Grey Zone, he had suffered many losses from harpers in the past. But now that he was a god of the evil camp, those harpers did not dare to trouble him. However, these energetic fellows seemed to have set their sights on the Dragon Witch cult, which was a good thing. As long as the harpist knew about it, the goddess of the forest and ranger, Melikai, would not sit idly by. Of course. The premise was that the silver dragon in front of him could leave alive. Bone prison. Dimensional lock. Greater disjunction. The members of the Dragon Witch cult in front of him chose to argue with the silver dragon with a strong sense of justice or kill her and turn her into an undead. The battle was going in a very unfavorable direction from the beginning. The legendary wizards of the Dragon Witch cult sealed the space and then used disjunction to destroy the spells and items on the silver dragon. This was a very smart tactic because most of the silver dragons were very rich. When they turned into human form, they would prepare a lot of magic items for themselves. Roar. A dull roar was heard. Alexandrina decisively turned into her original form in the face of this unfavorable situation. The combat power of adult dragons decreased greatly when they turned into human form. Although the silver dragon could retain a lot of spellcasting abilities, she was definitely not a match for these people in front of her. A silver dragon about 15 meters long appeared in front of everyone. She had very beautiful silver-white scales as if they were one. The width of her wings was much wider than other dragons. There was a special divine glow on her body, which meant that Alexandrina was blessed by a god. Dragon's Breath. Facing the siege of the members of the Dragon Witch cult, the silver dragon Alexandrina chose the most effective tactic at the beginning of the battle. She took a deep breath at the beginning, followed by a dragon's breath, then launched a wing attack at the nearest target. There were not many creatures in the material plane that could compete with the power of adult dragons. Even the silver dragon, who was not known for her strength, was able to suppress the members of the Dragon Witch cult in an instant. However, this suppression could not last long because there was a limit to the number of times she could use her dragon's breath. Ah! Screams of agony rang out. Under the counterattack of the silver dragon Alexandrina, the members of the Dragon Witch cult were quickly killed. However, as soon as the dragon's breath ended, a counterattack followed. Accompanied by a spray of blood, a Dracolic rushed over and tore apart Alexandrina's beautiful scales, taking away a large piece of flesh. The wizards of the Dragon Witch cult immediately began to cast spells such as weaken, damage increase, and reduce resistance to continuously weaken Alexandrina's strength. Soren stood still in the dark and did not seem to have any intention of making a move. This silver dragon did not have any relationship with her, so Soren had to think carefully about whether it was worth it to expose himself in advance for her sake. However, at this moment, an evil aura appeared, accompanied by some kind of divine power that made Soren tremble. A strange item suddenly appeared in the hands of the Dracolic in front of him, and the next moment, a black flame appeared on the Dracolic's palm. This vicious flame instantly burned Alexandrina's body, causing her flesh to gradually wither and her dragon's scales to shatter like fragile glass. At this time, Soren noticed that the Dracolic was wearing a crown under his cloak. This crown contained divine power and some kind of divine power that came from the same source as Soren's. This is... Soren's expression changed instantly, and he murmured, "This is the aura of the King of the Dead, Mirko. P.S. The monthly ticket is about to expire. If you want, please vote again. Wait a minute." Chapter 1023. Part of Soren's power came from the three gods of death. Therefore, he was very sensitive to the power of these three powerful evil gods. Almost as soon as they used some kind of evil black fire, he had a very strong feeling. What is this power? Soren frowned and stared at the member of the Dragon Witch cult in front of him. Under the terrible black fire, the silver dragon, Alexandrina's life force was rapidly weakening. It was as if the fire directly ignited her life and kept burning her life force. This power came from the former king of the dead, Mirko. It was a kind of fire from the god of death and had a terrible lethality to any creature, just like the famous, silver fire, of the goddess of magic. Soren seemed to have thought of something and said in surprise, "The horned crown. Crown off horns." There was no doubt about it. Mirko of the three gods of death had definitely fallen. He died very early, and his divinity had long been inherited by someone else. Most of his power should have dissipated. Then, under the circumstances that he had already fallen, what else could exert his divine power? A divine artifact. And it must be a high-grade divine artifact. A divine artifact that disappeared from the material plane appeared in Soren's memory. It was a divine artifact that was obtained by a legendary figure and brought out of the material plane. The horned crown. This was a divine artifact that preserved part of the divinity and intelligence of the King of Bones, the former god of death, Mirko. It was a silver headband with a black diamond embedded in it. Four sharp bone horns stretched out around it, and the inside of the diamond shone with a strange light. The horned crown was an evil item with self-consciousness. Its only purpose in existence was to constantly spread evil and pain. This divine artifact was an item that Mirko made a long time ago when he still had divine power. Although it was finally broken into pieces by the black staff, there was still some power left in these pieces. At the moment when Mirko was killed by Midnight, later the goddess of magic, he used his dying power to pass through the heavy defense around the tower of the Black Scepter and recast the fragment of the horned crown. Then, he poured his remaining divinity into it and teleported away. For a long time, the horned crown was very fond of controlling people to invade and destroy the Cyric Church and its believers, but it would try its best to avoid the allies of Kale and the temple of goddess Mistra. This divine artifact preserved part of Mirko's divine power. It contained the mysteries of death and preserved the evilest flames of negative energy of death. It could kill mortals directly, but it could also endlessly erode the lives of divine creatures. This divine artifact is still preserved. It was said that before Mirko died, Zhuang injected his last divinity and power into it. The power of death was very useful to Soren. If he could get this artifact and extract its power, he might be able to comprehend the divinity of death. Shadow Realm of Shadow. In the next moment, Soren disappeared. He did not intend to save the silver dragon Alexandrina in front of him, but he was determined to get this divine artifact left by the former god of death. Time stop. Regional divine impact. The silver dragon Alexandrina's injuries were getting worse and worse, and death seemed to be coming at any time. She couldn't help but recall her past. A young silver dragon flew at the top of the Cloud Mountains. Alexandrina felt that death was approaching. This made her feel very unwilling, so she prayed to the gods for help. The next moment, it was as if the gods had answered her prayer, because everything around her seemed to have stopped. A silver-white stream of light suddenly appeared. It seemed that in an instant, the Dracolic in front of her was split in half by some terrible force. This was a power that mortals could not imagine at all. She had never seen anything that could kill a Dracolic so easily. She thought it was the arrival of the goddess of the forest. But right after that, Alexandrina felt an even more terrifying and evil aura. Soren's figure flashed through space. After killing a Dracolic with 16 slashes in an instant, he set his sights on the other adepts. Divine Dispel. Layers of protective magic shattered like eggshells. Soren waved a silver-white stream of light and pierced into the Lich's body. At the moment of destroying the Lich's body, a powerful divine power crossed space and destroyed the Lich's phylactery with death. It seemed that only a second had passed. When Alexandrina's consciousness gradually returned, all the enemies in front of her had become cold corpses. And in front of this silver dragon, there was a terrible thin figure. Even just standing there casually, she could not help but feel her soul trembling. Evil god. A very terrible evil god. Although the other party didn't even look at her from the beginning to the end, Alexandrina felt suffocated and didn't even dare to move. Soren did not pay attention to Alexandrina behind him. He gently waved his hand, and a crown flew out from the wreckage of the Lich in front of him. At the moment when it fell into his hand, the crown trembled violently as if it was struggling, and there was some kind of strange scream. But all its struggles were in vain. Soren easily suppressed its power. Horned Crown. It was a high-grade artifact created by Mirko. It could grant the following abilities, has the same effect as the Lich's aura of fear. When resisting necromancy spells and magic effects, has 25 magic resistance. Has the same effect as a level 6 priest's ability to repel or command undead creatures. If you already have this ability can be stacked with your priest's level. Can cast unmistakable teleportation once a day, only limited to teleporting the wearer and his equipment. Death Aura, can be cast once every 10 minutes, the range of influence is 40 feet cone. All creatures within the cone-shaped area must pass a toughness check of difficulty 20. Otherwise, they will immediately die, and after 1d4 rounds, they will become bound spirits under the control of the crowns. If they pass the check, they will only receive 3d6 plus 20 damage. This is the instant death effect of necromancy. Mirko's hand, once a day, the wearer can cover one of his hands with black flames. Using these flames will be treated as a touch spell. When the wearer successfully uses a melee attack to hit the target must pass a toughness check of difficulty 25, or they will die immediately and become a spirit under the control of the wearer after 1d4 rounds. It was a high-grade artifact in the truest sense. It was a very terrifying item in itself. Mirko had injected the power of death into it. In addition to the terrible black flames, there was also a death aura that could be cast once every 10 minutes. Any creature that was killed would become a bound spirit. This was an artifact that could easily create an army of undead creatures. However, this high-grade artifact also had a curse that affected anyone who wore it. The wearer's alignment will immediately change to neutral evil. Unless Mirko agrees, the wearer cannot take off the crown. The only way to remove the crown is to wait for it to teleport away. The horned crown can cast suggestion on the wearer once a day, controlling the wearer's consciousness. The wearer will gradually become an undead creature under the 2-year-long curse. Every time the death aura and Mirko's hand are used, the process will be accelerated for 1 to 4 months. When the transformation is complete, the wearer's appearance and creature type will become an undead creature, but he will still retain his normal abilities. If the horned crown leaves the wearer who has become an undead creature, the wearer will die immediately. The wearer will become very suspicious and will try his best to protect and keep the horned crown so that no one can take it away. When the horned crown is worn, all creatures within 100 feet of the crown must pass a willpower check, or they will be affected by the resonance spell. Mirko's remaining consciousness screamed in horror. He felt Soren's power and tried to escape, but there was no way. He had been suppressed by Soren's divine power. So this is the horned crown? Soren looked at the crown in front of him and said to himself, its ability is similar to the one ring that I made. He created 7 rings in the bottomless abyss. All of them were lesser divine artifacts and high-grade legendary items. They were also enchanted with suggestion and control spells. The effect was similar to the horned crown, but they did not have such powerful enchantments. Soren took a deep breath, then closed his eyes and felt some kind of power. He murmured, "Death." The remaining power of the divinity of death. It seems that I really have to thank you, Mirko. Then, you can completely die now. P.S. Second update. The monthly ticket will expire in 6 hours. Those who have a monthly ticket can vote. Chapter 1024. The silver dragon, Alexandrina, stood rooted to the ground, not daring to move an inch. However, after suppressing Mirko's consciousness, Soren turned his head and looked at her. Then he frowned and said, "What are you doing here? Are you going to have a long talk with these members of the Dragon Witch cult?" Alexandrina swallowed her saliva when she heard this. Her heart finally calmed down. It seemed like the evil god in front of her had no ill intentions. Otherwise, she wouldn't have survived until now. Alexandrina immediately got up and bowed. "Esteemed Lord of Shadows. I'll take my leave then." The silver dragon Alexandrina immediately spread her wings and soared into the sky, then flew out of the mountains. Soren turned around and shook his head. He then walked toward the camp of the Dragon Witch cult in front of him. Since he had already made his move, he had to eliminate the root of the problem. This camp must be completely destroyed. Otherwise, it would easily alert the other gods. The dragons that he once had to look up to were now easily killed. After becoming a god, Soren felt that the world had become smaller. The entire battle didn't last long. Although many gods had fallen during the Avatar crisis, the power of a true god began to surpass that of mortals. Not to mention that Soren was an intermediate god. If they wanted to kill Soren, all the members of the Dragon Witch cult would have to work together, and they only had a 30% chance of winning. This was just a camp of the Dragon Witch cult. Other than the 2 Dracolics, there were only a few high-grade members. However, they brought Soren a lot of slaughter EXP and spoils of war. Soren obtained more than 5 million slaughter EXP and some legendary items. At the same time, he also used soul assimilation to extract the dragon crystal from the Dracolic's bodies. This was a very overbearing method that could easily offend the gods of the dragon system, because in this case, the dragon's soul would be imprisoned as well. Motor City. At the top of the arcane tower, Gloria sat cross-legged in front of a crystal ball. The scepter of Savras was in her hand. Accompanied by a silver-white radiance, a little bit of divine power was extracted from it and gradually merged into Gloria's body. It was as if he had reached a critical point. All of a sudden, Gloria's long hair fluttered in the wind. Her entire being and the scepter of Savras glowed with divine light. Then, the light on the scepter gradually dimmed, while the divine light on Gloria's body grew denser and denser. The power of prophecy enveloped Gloria's body, and a trace of the law that represented the gods gradually merged into her body. As if breaking through the boundaries of space, Gloria's eyes turned silver-white. Congratulations. Soren suddenly appeared on top of the tower. He stood behind Gloria and said happily, "You seem to have mastered the power of prophecy." Savras was the god of prophecy. At the same time, as the loser of the competition for the priesthood of sorcerers, she also held the priesthood of prophecy. Before obtaining this divine artifact, Soren had already erased Savra's will. Gloria herself was a master of prophecy, and now that she had extracted the power from the artifact, she immediately advanced. At this moment, Gloria had become a demigod of prophecy. "I think I saw something." Gloria turned and stood up when she heard this. She seemed a little tired as she muttered, "The domain of the gods is too vast. I don't seem to be able to control this power yet." The priesthood of prophecy was merging into Gloria's body. This allowed her to use any prophecy spells, and she could see fragments of the future. This priesthood of prophecy was very difficult to master. As a mortal who had just advanced, Gloria encountered a problem that was even more troublesome than Vivian. It was even harder for her to control this power than Vivian. "Don't be hasty." Soren reached out and hugged Gloria in front of him and said slowly, "You've only just begun. As you accumulate more divinity and divine persona, you'll gradually get used to this power. For now, put aside the matter of the arcane tower and leave it to Alice and the others. I'll use this time to teach you how to adapt to the power of the priesthood." Whether it was Vivian or Gloria, they did not have the help of the system. Soren could quickly adapt to the priesthood, but there was still a period of rejection, and he almost had problems with his mind. Gloria was in the same situation now. The prophecy allowed her to sense too much, but she could not control it herself. Soren had to help her stabilize her mind. This process could take up to a month. Fortunately, Gloria did not inherit too much power, or she would have to spend a long time in seclusion like Vivian to adapt to the divinity. "Right." Gloria seemed to have thought of something and muttered, "I seem to be able to sense the structure of the weave. And I seem to have sensed the location of the goddess of magic. She's in the southwest of this world." Something had happened to the god of mages. When Soren obtained the scepter of Savras, part of the power of the priesthood of mages had been integrated into it. Gloria seemed to have received some of the power of the priesthood of mages, so her perception of the weave had become stronger. "The goddess of magic is in the southwest?" Soren thought for a moment and said, "Try not to use the prophecy ability for now. Wait until you've completely absorbed the power of the scepter of Savras and become a lesser god, then try to access the weave to obtain the priesthood of mages." Gloria nodded. Soren had entered the realm of the gods. Whether it was for herself or to accompany Soren, she had to gradually step into the realm of the gods. In the study, two Soren appeared here, but soon the other one gradually disappeared. A strange crown appeared in Soren's palm. He reached out and touched the crown in front of him, feeling it tremble. Then, a golden light of divinity appeared in his eyes, and in the next moment, a powerful domain of divinity enveloped the space. A majestic divine power rushed into the crown. The remnant soul of the former god of death, Mirko, let out a sharp scream, but it was mercilessly suppressed by Soren's powerful killing intent. The remnant soul of a god who had been dead for a long time could not stop him. As the divinity was extracted, some data appeared in front of his eyes. Discovered the divinity of death. Extracting energy. You have extracted the divinity of the high-grade divine item, Horned Crown. You have obtained 10 divinity points. You have obtained 5 divinity points. Domain of Death upgraded. You have obtained the information of the Priesthood of Death. Ability upgraded. Your Domain of Death upgraded to the Priesthood of Death. The third notification of the Priesthood of Death appeared. When Soren had completely extracted the divinity of the Horned Crown, his Domain of Death became the Priesthood of Death. However, although he had the Priesthood of Death, because this newly acquired ability was very weak, Soren did not extend a new divinity ability. The main reason was that the power of death was still in the hands of Klemvox and Naruto. The acquisition of this priesthood only meant that he could gain followers of death and let the fanatics visit the domain of death. The light of divinity dissipated. As Soren extracted the power of the Horned Crown, this high-grade divine item quickly became an ordinary item. Soren played with the divine item in front of him and murmured, although the power of divinity is gone. But its characteristics are very good. Divine creation. Create high-grade magic items. Change form. With the golden light of divinity, the Horned Crown turned into a melted liquid in the palm of Soren's hand. Then he injected a little of his divinity into it, and soon the divine item was reshaped by him. 7 strange rings appeared in front of his eyes. Soren melted the core gem and injected it into the last ring. Then, he used suggestion, control, and the power of divinity bit by bit. The characteristics of the Horned Crown were very similar to the one ring created by Soren, and it had the effect of psychological suggestion and mind control. Now he remade 7 rings with the Horned Crown and kept the last one as a controller to make a new divine item. Different from the one ring made in the past, this time the one ring was injected with the power of the Priesthood of Death by Soren. These rings would give the wearer a powerful blessing, but also because of the Horned Crown, the one ring would erode the wearer's body. Finally, the wearer of the one ring would be transformed into the undead after death, and it would be a more advanced binding spirit endowed with the power of death. The Horned Crown itself has a binding spirit. Soren thought about it and extracted a little divinity from between his eyebrows. Then he said, in this case, directly use the one ring as the medium to create a high-grade ring spirit. A little divinity was injected into the one ring. The original power of the Horned Crown was strengthened again. Soren gave up the original advantage of numbers and concentrated the power of death. When the first owner of these rings died, a powerful ring spirit would appear. The divine item was gradually completed. Soren finally left his own inscription on the one ring, and then put them all away. The one ring was completed. However, it still needed to be considered who to give it to because the ability of the first owner affected the power of the ring spirit. The bottomless abyss. The third layer. The forgotten land. In the depths of the hot lava, the figure of the Baylor leader, Sauron, appeared. Behind him were teams of fire demons. Compared to the previous time, the number of fire demons had increased a lot, and the number of fire demons had increased to 8. Under Sauron's gaze, these fire demons entered the lava one by one. Then he cut open his palm and injected a little bit of the Baylor's blood essence. This could help the fire demons obtain a medium to upgrade. When the accumulated demonic power was strong enough, these fire demons would have the opportunity to evolve and become new fire demons at any time. Sauron looked down at the lava pool in front of him and murmured, "It's almost time to prepare for a bloody battle." Chapter 10:25. It was almost November. With the arrival of the new year, the disaster of the undead finally broke out completely. The Northwind city in the Frost Kingdom was breached by the Dragon Lich, and more than 100,000 people were slaughtered by the undead. When she heard the news, the angry Princess Royal directly froze hundreds of thousands of undead. But it was too late. The souls of the mortals seemed to have been taken away by some evil force, and the underworld did not welcome these victims. The same thing was happening all over the continent. Far away in the Eastern Kingdom, the Boat of the Desert was also attacked by the evil ancient mummies. A large number of innocent civilians were killed, and their souls mysteriously disappeared. There was a great change in the underworld. After Klemvox was seriously injured and disappeared, Naruto did a very bold thing. He opened a passage and linked his kingdom to the underworld. Then a war broke out between his servants and Klemvox's servants. This war undoubtedly ended with Naruto's victory. Without the support of Klemvox, his servants could not resist at all. Soon, the source of the underworld, the palace of the Nether Sea, was directly occupied by Naruto. Klemvox almost completely lost control of the underworld, and now the only surviving thing was the kingdom attached to the underworld. At the same time, many undead kings began to appear in the underworld. The immortal blatantly plundered souls from the underworld and turned them into undead. Many spellcasters attached to the spiritual world and the underworld also turned into liches one by one. But what was puzzling was that Jurgil did not seem to care about the drastic changes in the underworld, and Naruto did not disturb Jurgil's palace at all. Jurgil was still recording the deaths. But this time, his followers seemed to have begun to record more deaths, not only of creatures but also of the world. The series of upheavals accelerated the conflict in the material plane. In order to protect the souls of their believers, the gods almost no longer relied on the death pantheon. They sent out their own oracles from another world to be responsible for guiding the souls. And without the watch of the death pantheon, in the situation of the outbreak of the undead, the demons, devils, and demons of the lower planes took the opportunity to plunder souls. The most obvious manifestation. It was in the third layer of the abyss, the Forgotten Land, that the Baylor demon leaders soon found that there were more night witches and hags with abyss worms. Even the Yugoloths were no longer in the business of ferrying the Styx. On the contrary, they began to sell cheap souls. Most of them were ordinary people, not professionals. The order of the entire underworld was in chaos. The soul stealers began to blatantly harvest souls. Due to the turmoil in the underworld, drastic changes occurred in the Rift Plane and Bator Hell in just half a month. The number of low-level demons and devils that were converted had increased explosively. The underworld had always restricted the number of souls entering the underworld. But now, this restriction was gone. While the undead were crazily snatching souls, the demons and devils took the opportunity to fish in troubled waters. At this moment, in the sixth tributary of the underworld, which ran through the 5 layers of the abyss, it was originally guarded and maintained by Klemvox's servants of death, but now there was no one here. Naruto did not intend to manage the Styx now. He sent all his servants of death to the battle, and the tributary here became the battlefield of the demons and the evil soul stealers. They frantically plunder souls from here. At the same time, because of the loss of the divine power of death, the chaotic nature of the abyss began to break out. A subconsciousness filled with violence and chaos was eroding the Nether River. In the endless meandering Styx, the river that ran through the entire lower plane seemed to be interfered with by some chaotic force, and the souls floating in it would disappear every once in a while. At the same time, somewhere in the first 10 layers of the abyss, a new abyss worm would quickly appear. Crimson Flat. This was the territory of the Baylor demon leader Sauron, and it was also a special area close to the tributary of the Styx. Recently, some changes began to happen here. This change was still very short, about a week or so. When Soren just received the news of the abnormality in the Styx, something strange had already happened here. Not far away was the Styx. But now, a part of the Nether River seemed to have been cut off. The Nether River, which was originally one, began to diverge. Then, one of them poured into the ground below. This place was called the Crimson Flat, because the land here had turned crimson due to some unknown reason, and now the land here was even redder. A tributary of the Styx seemed to have gone deep into the ground. Since then, there had been an abnormality here. In just one day, thousands of abyss worms had appeared. There was a probability of the abyss transforming into demons, but the probability of transformation was definitely not that high. About 3 days later, the number of abyss worms here had reached about 10,000, and then the first batch of Dretch born in the slaughter appeared. The Dretch occupied this place and began to devour other abyss worms. Soon, the most powerful demon was promoted to a berserk demon, and then to a new Glabrizu. According to the normal progress, a low-level demon lord might be born here. But since this was Sauron's territory, the abnormality was soon discovered by his subordinates. The abyss had been transforming more and more abyss worms recently, but there were still very few like here. About the 5th day, the real change appeared. In the center of the crimson flat, there was a huge pit. It seemed to be formed by the collapse of its own accord, and then some kind of blood-red liquid began to gather in the pit. The speed of the liquid gathering was very fast, and the color of the nearby land gradually dimmed. Then, it seemed that all the abyss worms went crazy in an instant. The source of the Styx was constantly stealing souls. In just one day, tens of thousands of abyss worms were born. At the same time, these abyss worms were madly attacking and devouring each other. They ate the dead abyss worms, but they did not evolve. These abyss worms were getting bigger and bigger. It seemed that there was some kind of powerful force protecting them. They continued to evolve in the form of abyss worms. At first, Sauron's subordinates could still get close. Later, even the high-grade demons did not dare to get close because in the center of the flat, there was a huge blood pool. The area was more than 10 times larger than the blood pool controlled by Sauron. After the frenzied slaughter, 3 abyssal worms were fortunate enough to survive. Each of them was more than 20 meters long, and their skin was tougher than dragon skin. Even the high-grade demons sent by Sauron ate one of these crazy worms. They did not allow anyone to get close to the blood pool. This was a newborn blood pool, and it did not have any master. Under the influence of the subconsciousness of the abyss, the first function of the blood pool was to transform a mother worm. The 7th day, Sauron's figure came here. He looked down at the huge blood pool in front of him and murmured, "It seems that the mother worm is about to be born." Just like raising venomous insects, out of hundreds of thousands of abyssal worms, only 3 of them survived. Any one of them was strong enough to fight against the old dragon, but the power of the abyssal law had yet to bless them, because only the last survivor could become the mother of worms. When this transformation was completed, the mother worm would be blessed with the power of the law. It would have the power of a demigod and become the lowest grade secondary demon lord. Every level of the abyss had a mother worm scattered around. They were the lowest grade secondary demon lords and only guarded near the blood pool. They were responsible for the birth and transformation of abyss worms. It seems that we still need to wait. Sauron's eyes showed a hint of excitement. After the birth of the mother worm, the blood pool will be truly formed. Such a big blood pool. And the source is directly connected to the Nether River. I wonder how many souls it can transform in a day. Sauron's original blood pool was only 1/10 the size of this one. It could transform about 300 to 500 abyss worms a day. The huge blood pool in front of him was 10 times the size of that one. The transformation ratio was of course more than 10 times. If it was connected to the Nether River due to the influence of the abyss, the number of transformed abyss worms might increase explosively. Sauron was the demon lord here. Naturally, this new blood pool would be its territory. When the real mother of worms was born, it would need to conquer this place, and then its army would expand rapidly. Immediately dispatch the 3rd Demon Legion to guard this place. Sauron thought for a while and ordered the elite succubus beside him. Don't let anyone come close. Don't disturb the battle of the mother worm. Pay attention to the Nether River nearby. Other demons are prohibited from approaching this area. Although Naruto's actions greatly increased the power of the undead, the subconsciousness of the abyss seemed to have taken the opportunity to bite off a large piece of meat from the underworld. In the lower plane, the abyss had the most tributaries of the Nether River. If there was a new blood pool in Sauron's place, then there would be new blood pools in other levels of the abyss. Perhaps after the underworld lost the management of the death god system, there would be an explosive growth of demons in the lower plane. The gods could only take care of their own believers now, and they must be the souls of devout believers. As for the souls of the other dead, they could only pray for themselves now. The Nether River had been cut off. The powerful death god system had been managing many tributaries of the Nether River. But with the success of Naruto's plot, these tributaries of the Nether River all fell into the hands of the lords of the lower plane. Demons, 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 and undead were trying to steal souls from the Nether River. If the Nether River was not very dangerous, the souls in it would have been divided up. Chapter 1026. In the Boundless Astral Plane. A steel fortress of the Githyanki stopped at the border of the Clock Nirvana mechanical realm, and then a group of heavily armed soldiers came down. At the border of the Clock Nirvana mechanical realm, there was already a Thaling waiting. Behind him were steel golems. When the Githyankis in front of him approached, Thaling walked over and said, "Welcome. I'm Thaling 7. I'm responsible for receiving this batch of materials for Sir Soren, and I'll give you the bill later." Needless to say, these Githyankis were the batch that Soren had looted. No one dared to default on the debt of a god, especially a notorious evil god. This was the second batch of goods of the Githyankis. In order to pay off the debt owed to Soren, they had looted a lot of places recently. But fortunately, Soren also gave them a little benefit, such as the reward that some gods could give. Soren didn't need these Githyankis to be loyal, he just needed them to pay back what they owed him. The leader of the Githyankis nodded, then motioned the soldiers next to him to transport the materials. Looking at these things that they had worked hard to loot were handed over to Thaling, his expression couldn't help but be a little painful. But when he thought of the terrible evil god, he finally decided to hand over the goods honestly. At the same time, at the back of the mechanical realm, Thaling 1 was calculating the next batch of goods. How many steel golems have been completed in this batch? About 120 golems. Well, then let's go to Mordor City first. The war in the material plane seems to be getting worse. Are these undead going to kill all the living? Who cares about them? Anyway, we are construct life. After all, the production of Mordor City was still limited. In order to increase the number of steel golems, Soren commissioned Thaling to help with the production. As the turmoil gradually intensified, there were more and more channels to obtain soul crystals. Mordor City could now produce a large number of steel golems. Thaling number 1 glanced at the list and said, "First, 100 steel golems and 10 diamond golems. It seems like Sir Soren has obtained a large number of diamonds. The third batch of orders is actually dominated by diamond golems. Could he have found a diamond planet in the astral plane?" Thaling did not reply. In fact, most construct life forms were rather boring, even more so than demons. Mordor City. Soren could no longer sit still after the undead calamity broke out. He was not the only one who could not sit still. The other gods could not sit still either. They could slightly ignore the life and death of mortals, but if it involved the foundation of the kingdom of God, what about the souls of the believers? The god of war finally made his move. After enduring for so long, the Church of War launched an operation to clean up the undead for the first time. Their apostle army also entered the lower planes to ensure that the river Styx connected to the kingdom of war would not be disturbed. The river Styx was like a blood vessel. From the beginning of a small river, it slowly grew to all parts of the multiverse. With the gradual increase of the population, many souls were no longer personally led, but relied on the river Styx to transport them. This was also the covenant made by the gods. The god of death was responsible for collecting the souls and finally sending them to the kingdom of the gods. But now that Klemvox had lost control of the underworld, this covenant was naturally invalid. The first thing the gods thought of was to ensure that the souls of their believers could return to the kingdom of God. Only then would they have other thoughts to think about others. It had to be said that the gods were also selfish. The Legion of the Church of War cleaned up the undead in the southwest of the continent. At the same time, they gathered a large number of adventurers to eliminate the undead. Once a god with great divine power made a move, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. The moment the power controlled by the god of war was activated, a large number of melee professions immediately gathered. At the same time, the goddess of strategy also cooperated with them. It seemed that they were ready to clean up the undead in the southwest plains. Thud, thud, thud. There was a sound of footsteps. Then Gloria's figure appeared in the room. She came over with a document in her hand. She frowned slightly and looked at Soren's face, then said, "Are you going to establish a country?" Soren looked up. He looked at Gloria's beautiful face, then gently waved his hand. Gloria came over and sat on Soren's knee, letting him put his hand into her robe and hold her gradually plump breast. His fingers seemed to have magical powers, causing her face to turn crimson and her breathing to quicken unconsciously. Soren seemed to be thinking about something. He bowed his head and said, "Yes." Gloria came back to her senses and adjusted her breathing. "Why Adele Isabella? If we establish a country on the south coast, what about Mordor?" Gloria's mind was still very clear, even if she was very shocked after knowing this. Soren fiddled with the bud and said slowly, "First of all, Adele Isabella has the blood of Queen Isabella. Second, she is the nominal lord of the Wind Spear Hills. There is no one in Mordor who is more suitable and can reduce criticism than her. The South Coast is the South Coast. The establishment of a country on the South Coast has little to do with Mordor. It's just a name for reasonable expansion. Everything will still run as it was." Gloria took a deep breath and said, "You didn't choose her because she served you?" "Serve? Of course, it was not the service of following a god, but another kind of service between a man and a woman." Soren shook his head. "Do you think I'm so easily influenced?" Gloria was finally relieved. She got up and kissed Soren on the face, and whispered, "Then do what you're going to do. I'll always be on your side." In fact, Soren asked someone to give this document to her, and she was already relieved. However, she still had to ask. The two princesses of Arendelle had already made her a little vigilant. Gloria felt that she should fight for more for herself and her mother. There was a huge piece of land in front of Soren's eyes. The topographic structure of the entire southern part of the continent was marked on it, and the location of the red dot was the Wind Spear Hills. Adele Isabella. Soren pondered and said to himself, "Queen Isabella's blood." Since the Arcane Empire, there have been few powerful empires in the material plane. If Adele Isabella is secretly allowed to establish a kingdom, then the entire south coast from the south of Waterdeep City to the border of the Principality of Rossard. It can be regarded as the homeland of Queen Isabella. Separate the secular world and maintain the purity of Mordor. Use the power of the secular world to strengthen Mordor, use the council to control Mordor, and ensure that the direction of Mordor has minimal impact on myself. The future. Even if Mordor is corrupted, as a god, I can easily purify Mordor directly from top to bottom. P.S. First update. I have something to do recently, and I need to sort it out. The latter part is important. Chapter 1027. No country could last forever. Even the powerful Silver Age and the Arcane Empire were also destroyed. A country could only live for a few hundred years at most, and a god would be unlucky if he died in less than 3,000 years. Soren could never tie himself to the kingdom. Otherwise, when a country was corrupted, Soren would also be corrupted. The same was true for Mordor. Soren established the parliament to deal with this situation. Maybe Mordor could maintain its current prosperity for 100, 200, or 300 years, but what about 500 or 1,000 years later? There would be a day when the power class of Mordor would gradually corrupt. When the system of Mordor became a barrier, and the lower-class civilians began to accumulate resentment, would Soren also be affected? He had to return to the kingdom of God. Therefore, from the moment Soren founded Mordor, he was ready to use an iron fist to completely cleanse the system of Mordor when it was corrupted in the future. The power class needed to be replaced. This might be hundreds of years later, but Soren had to be prepared in advance. When he returned to the kingdom of God, Soren would divide the world to ensure his superiority as a god, and at the same time, when the corruption of Mordor reached the critical point of his tolerance, he would carry out a bloody cleansing process from top to bottom. Not only Mordor, but even the Church of the Gods was the same. Why did the gods keep a proper distance from the Church? It was because even if the Church did something wrong, it could be blamed on some people inside the Church. Any church would inevitably be corrupted, and when this corruption appeared, the gods would eliminate it at the right time. For example, there used to be a fallen archbishop of the Lord of Light. All the sins he had committed were his own. The Lord of Light, on the other hand, could not see everyone because he was far away in mountain paradise. When this cancer was removed, the suffering believers and civilians would only resent the archbishop instead of the Lord of Light, because the Lord of Light would always be great. This was the power of the gods. Sauron divided the interior of the church, divided the power of Mordor, and arranged the kingdoms on the south coast. It was all for this. In the end, Sauron needed to remove himself from these and become a sharp sword hanging over the south coast of Mordor City, so that all the ambitious people would not be corrupted quickly, and at the same time, complete purification, when necessary. Adele Isabella was a very important key. In the beginning, as a descendant of Queen Isabella, she was able to help Sauron rightfully control some of the lands on the south coast. But now, because of the impact of the 3 Avatar crises, the entire southern region had been seriously damaged. Many lands had been barren and many towns had been destroyed. Now, there were many ownerless lands. However, even if it was an ownerless land, it could not be casually occupied. This required a reasonable status. And Adele Isabella was Sauron's rightful wife. The establishment of a kingdom would not be obstructed at this moment. After completing all of this, the Windspear Hills would be able to expand their territory and quickly swallow up the nearby plains, leaping to the size of the Principality of Rossard. This was beneficial to Sauron's future plans, as land was the most important thing for population growth. However, after thinking about it, Sauron said to himself, these still need some royal recognition. Maybe it's time to visit Princess Royal. Establishing a kingdom was establishing a kingdom. Sauron was Sauron. As a god, Sauron could secretly control the kingdom, but once it was established, even if everyone knew that Sauron was secretly controlling everything, they could never put Sauron in the position of king on the surface. That was an act of digging a hole and burying oneself. Adele Isabella was a suitable candidate. As a fanatic of Sauron, she would definitely return to the kingdom of God after death, and this kingdom would be handed over to her to control. Even if the kingdom was destroyed in the future, Sauron's divinity would not be unstable. But this was still a risky move. Why did many gods only control a city at most and not a kingdom? The reason was that the kingdom was too short. For any god, a few hundred years in a kingdom would pass in the blink of an eye. The corruption of the noble class would inevitably lead to the collapse of the kingdom. If a god was dragged into this quagmire of karma, the result would be terrible. Even the goddess of aristocracy was wise enough to maintain a distance from any kingdom. She only maintained the system of protecting the nobles, but she would not easily approach any kingdom. The system must be reconsidered. Sauron looked at the map and pondered. There was a large area drawn on it, which was the land that needed to be occupied in the future. The aristocratic system is too backward. But without the nobles, the civilization of this era is completely impossible. It will take a long time to popularize it. The best way now should be to separate the nobles' titles from the kingdom's official positions. The feudal system is definitely not possible. The characteristic of this era was that a certain noble was basically the manager and ruler of a city, but this was not the system Sauron needed. He would appropriately keep the nobles. But the power of the kingdom must be centralized. What Sauron wanted was centralization, and at the same time, to ensure the appointment and dismissal of any official positions in the kingdom. He would greatly reduce the nobles' land and remove them from the whirlpool of power. The situation where the nobles were equal to the emperors of the kingdom was absolutely intolerable. For Sauron, the steps could not be taken too far. He did not care how long the kingdom could exist, but he cared about how much power the kingdom could have during this time. Population, land, resources. Sauron needed a large number of believers, and everything was to serve this purpose. Not only his believers, but also Vivian's, Gloria's, and even fallen witch-Currans. Sauron wanted to establish a god system, and a god system was often born within a race. Even if the human population was the largest, there were only so many god systems. The entire Amazon rainforest could support the belief of the Storm Lord. Similarly, Sauron needed a lot of people in order to support his own divine system. Now that Gloria was already a demigod, Vivian was gradually learning to control the belief. When Vivian was fully adapted, she should stand on the stage and expand her believers. Otherwise, the little girl was likely to be reduced to lesser divine power. I should go and see Adele Isabella in a few days. Soren stood up and murmured, but now, maybe I should go and divide the wealth of the river Styx. He had a big plan. It was a very bold plan. Basically, the gods of the good alignment would never do it. The gods of the evil alignment also needed to carefully consider it because this plan was, cut off the river Styx. P.S. Guess what Soren is going to do with the river Styx? Chapter 10:28. Cutting off the Styx. This was a very dangerous act. Because no matter who dared to tamper with the Styx at any time, it would be regarded as a very serious provocation by the Death Divine system. This could even lead to a war between the divine kingdoms, so even when the Avatar crisis broke out, no one dared to tamper with the Styx. This situation continued until the disappearance of the King of the Dead, Clemvox. In the situation where Naruto and Clemvox were at loggerheads, finally some daring people began to have ideas about the Styx. There was no doubt about it. Soren was also one of these daring people. The greatest value of the Styx itself was transportation. Yugros and some demons relied on ferrying on the Styx for a living, and they also acted as assistants of the Death Divine system. However, the most valuable thing of the Styx was the goods it transported, which were souls from all over the multiverse. No matter what race or plane, most of the souls had something to do with the Styx. Soren's goal was the third layer of the abyss, the Forgotten Land. The Forgotten Land was mentioned before, but there was one thing that must be reiterated here, that was, the birth of the name, Forgotten Land, had a very important relationship with the Styx itself. In this level of the abyss, many demons tended to forget certain things more easily than in other places. Even people from other worlds who arrived here had to pass a compulsory exemption test after staying here for a period of time. Otherwise, they would lose some memories of the past. The forgotten memories were related to their own abilities and the importance of the memories. They might forget small things like eating and drinking, or they might forget their own identity and so on. The Forgotten Land was a good place because the demons born here were pure. Most of them only retained part of their fighting instincts from their previous lives, and most of their memories had disappeared. This meant that they were born blank and were easier to be controlled by the demon lord. The key reason why this happened in the Forgotten Land was the Styx. There was the main road of the Styx in the upper layer of the abyss, and the most tributaries of the Styx in the first 10 layers, and some of these tributaries penetrated into the Forgotten Land itself. Because of the erosion of the Styx, the creatures here were more likely to forget some things than in other places. In short, the Forgotten Land was like a huge delta surrounded by the Styx. The main stream and tributaries of the Styx surrounded this place. Soren's target was the 7th tributary of the Styx. This place was close to the border of the Forgotten Land, which was also close to the edge of the distorted void. The Styx itself was protected by some kind of law power, and at the same time, it had a strong corrosive effect and could make the dead and the living forget some things. The width of the 7th tributary was about 20 meters. Branching off from the side of the Styx's main road, it broke into the Golumba Arena about 100 kilometers away from Soren's Kingdom of God, and finally passed through the Forgotten Land to reach the 7th and 8th levels of the abyss. Almost every tributary of the Nether River was connected to the lower levels of the abyss. In the direction of the Golumba Arena, the new giant blood pool was connected to the 5th tributary of the Styx. Soren's target was the 7th tributary of the Styx. Golden light converged. It was rare that Soren personally went to the bottomless abyss. After mastering the divinity of death, Soren was basically involved in the struggle of the Styx, and he was bound to collide with them in the future. Therefore, after deciding to attack the Styx, Soren did not hesitate at all and directly descended in his true body. Divine form. With the gathering of a huge amount of divine power, Soren's figure turned into a golden giant. Other people in this plane seemed to have sensed it, especially those powerful demons who had the one ring given by Soren. At this moment, they looked at this side with awe. Change space. The surrounding space gradually distorted. The Styx was a very dangerous thing. Even the gods could not touch it easily. Only those who had mastered the power of death could touch it, but they would also feel very uncomfortable and slightly corrosive. The space in front of him gradually distorted. Some kind of powerful law power collided with the power of Soren's divinity, so that the surrounding soil was suspended in the air. The Styx was the product of the law. From a small river to a huge vein through the multiverse, the Styx itself carried a very powerful force. Change size. Change reality. Change form. The power of the three divinities was activated at the same time. Soren's figure stood on the ground, then waved his hand, and the dark red soil in front of him separated directly, gradually turning into a river of more than 3,000 meters long and about 20 meters wide. The earth split open. The powerful power of the gods was revealed at this moment. Soren directly transformed part of the terrain of the bottomless abyss in front of him with the great divine power accumulated by the city of Moder. The water of the Styx collided violently. As if breaking through the limit of some law, the tributary of the Styx in front of him directly changed its course, and part of the water poured into the river opened by Soren. Divine creation. A golden light went directly along the new river, like a rainbow bridge guiding the flow of the Styx. A large amount of water mixed with the souls in it poured into the new river and moved forward quickly. The original tributary of the Styx suddenly dropped a lot. Wails and howls of agony could be heard from all around. Vaguely, there was also some sort of subconscious, terrifying backlash energy. Soren's face was pale. He was under the terrible pressure of the water of the Styx at the moment, but Soren did not flinch at all. Instead, he continued to guide the divine power to transform the Styx in front of him. Divine shock wave. After the water of the Styx was introduced into the new river, Soren's golden light skyrocketed, and then a powerful shock wave of divine power hit the mountain next to him. The mountain of nearly 100 meters high was directly cut off by Soren. God's descent. Soren's figure turned into a golden giant that was hundreds of meters high. He directly held the broken mountain in front of him out of thin air, and then smashed it down toward the original tributary of the Styx. Boom! There was a loud noise that shook the earth. The mountain of hundreds of meters was directly cut off by Soren and thrown into the original Styx. For a time, the whole tributary of the Styx was cut off, and the huge mountain became a dam that blocked the river. Divine reconstruction. The water of the Styx washed the mountain in front of him. The strong corrosiveness quickly eroded the soil and exposed the solid rock. Soren turned his divine power into a golden light curtain attached to the mountain in front of him. Then he waved his hand and broke the original law barrier with his divine power. In one breath, the water of the Styx was completely diverted into the river that he created. Boom! The surging water of the Styx flowed and quickly reached the end of the new river. It was a huge pool, but all this was just on the surface, because there was a space passage under the pool. It was directly connected to Soren's kingdom. The whole transformation process was barely half completed here. The other half of Soren's transformation was in his kingdom. Chapter 1029. The Shadow Kingdom. In the beginning, this kingdom was too close to the shadow plane, so the interior was half shadow. Everything was gray. Most of the petitioners in the divine kingdom were also shadow creatures. However, as Soren took control of the divine kingdom, everything inside was reconstructed. Especially the original gray world, now there were more colors. However, the entire kingdom was very large. Without entering the kingdom, Soren couldn't completely reconstruct it, so the northwest part of the kingdom was still the desolate Shadow Kingdom. However, there were some special changes happening here. A huge pool of reincarnation was placed here. Petitioners couldn't get pregnant or reproduce, even though the gods had given them a lifespan of thousands of years. However, no petitioner could get pregnant. Even the otherworldly gods' servants could only be created in the form of angels. That was why the population of the kingdom couldn't be increased internally. They could only rely on souls from other worlds. This was also the reason why some gods' divine kingdoms would quickly wither or even be directly destroyed after their churches in the material plane were destroyed. Groups of heroic spirits stood guard at the border. There was a river at the border of this land. When Soren used his powerful divine power to break through space and bring the water of the river Styx into the kingdom, the special pool of reincarnation was activated. Soren couldn't casually turn souls into petitioners. However, he could turn these souls into other forms. Demons were just one of the ways he could transform them. When the river Styx brought the souls into Soren's kingdom, the pool of reincarnation was activated under the influence of the plane's laws. Then, a shadow appeared near the pool of reincarnation. This was just the beginning. When the first shadow appeared, the second and third quickly followed. Then, there were other forms of souls and higher-level shadow creatures. The pool of reincarnation automatically turned them into shadow creatures of the same level according to the differences in their nature. In just a short while, there were hundreds of shadow creatures gathered around the pool of reincarnation. They had long lost their memories of their previous lives. After being turned into shadow creatures, they were hostile to others. These shadow creatures fought each other and even attacked petitioners who came close, but were quickly destroyed by the heroic spirits. Outside the divine kingdom, Soren panted as he retracted his godly power. Even a god would find it difficult to change the course of the river Styx, but it seemed like he had succeeded. The first monster pool seems to have been completed. Soren closed his eyes and sensed everything in his god's kingdom. Although he couldn't enter, it didn't mean that he couldn't sense anything. Gods in the later stage of the Avatar crisis could already know something about his god's kingdom. Farming in the monster pool. This was what Soren was planning to do with the Styx. It wasn't just the abyssal blood pool that could steal the souls of the Styx and turn them into demons. The Shadow Plane's reincarnation pool could also transform shadow beings. What Soren did was to keep the souls in this tributary of the Styx. Most of the material planes were pan-believers. After they died, many of them would not enter the kingdom of the gods. Instead, they would flow along the river Styx to the origin sea to be reshaped. What Soren was doing right now was akin to a thief. He was constantly stealing souls into his divine kingdom and using the pool of reincarnation to turn them into shadow beings. It was like a monster pool. As long as there were souls passing through this tributary of the Styx, the pool of reincarnation would constantly spawn shadow beings. What's more important is that, the god's kingdom itself was very close to only entering and not leaving. As long as a soul entered the god's kingdom and was killed, a part of the soul power would be absorbed by the petitioner and used to evolve into a heroic spirit. The other part of the soul power would automatically be integrated into the god's kingdom itself. Once Soren entered the god's kingdom, he would be able to mobilize it. It was mentioned before. Petitioners could also die. When they died, their soul power would automatically dissipate into the god's kingdom, and the god's kingdom would absorb this soul power to expand its area. Matter itself was made up of energy. The soul power was closer to the lowest energy structure. After the transformation, the god's kingdom could continuously expand its area. At this moment, inside Soren's god's kingdom, thousands of shadow beings had already appeared. They quickly expanded and occupied a territory of about 50 square kilometers. Outside this area was where the heroic spirits under Soren's command were stationed. Farming also required raising monsters. Shadow beings that were too low level weren't worth much. Soren set up an area with the pool of reincarnation as the center of the god's kingdom for these shadow beings to expand and grow. As long as the Styx's water was constant, these creatures wouldn't decrease. When the shadow beings reached a critical point, it would be time for the heroic spirits to eliminate them. This number couldn't be too high, or the heroic spirits would die. But it couldn't be too low either. Otherwise, there wouldn't be too much profit. According to Soren's estimation, if there weren't any major natural or man-made disasters that would cause too many deaths in the material plane, the god's kingdom's farming area could be cleared once every 3 days. The accumulated soul power would gradually expand the area of the god's kingdom. It would also automatically extract energy from the elemental channels to form new matter. It could be the sea or the mountains. When Soren wasn't in the gods' kingdom, the birth of these new matter was random. Only when the gods were in the gods' kingdom could they control whether the area of the sea or the land increased. At the same time, in the third layer of the abyss, the forgotten land. After a whole day and night of fighting, the most powerful mother of worms finally appeared. She killed and swallowed the other two mother of worms. Then, a huge abyssal worm of more than 30 meters long appeared in front of the other demons. This was the largest mother of worms that Sauron had seen so far. She even had the aura of a giant dragon. She was probably close to the strength of a weak god. It's me. It's the leader of the Baelor demons. The Lord of the Forgotten Land. Sauron's body was ignited in a raging fire. He walked step by step toward the mother of worms and said in a deep voice, "Lowly worm, submit under my feet. Or else, I will kill you without hesitation. I will extract your soul." The pressure of the demon lord shrouded the entire blood pool. Sauron flapped his demon wings and flew to the front of the mother of worms with a huge beheading sword in his hand. He waved the 30-meter-long flame whip gently, as if he would not hesitate to whip it down if there was any resistance. The newborn mother of worms seemed to be uneasy. It hesitated and seemed to resist. But in the end, it gave up resistance because it could feel that it was no match for Sauron. Moreover, the mother of worms served the demon lord. Very good. After confirming that the mother of worms had submitted, Sauron slowly flew down. Behind him, a large group of succubus gathered. Sauron turned to them and said, "Control this place. No one else is allowed to come close. Give me the statistics of the number of abyssal worms born every day. Looks like my demon army needs to expand." One was the abyssal blood pool, and the other was the shadow reincarnation pool. In the third layer of the abyss, Soren had already controlled 2 tributaries of the Styx. The longer he controlled them, the more souls he would steal. Chapter 1030. Dense Needle Forest. A tall human ranger was walking through the dense forest. She had a very high level of skill and seemed to be moving at a speed that ordinary people could not imagine. Soon, the human ranger reached her destination. It was a woodland planted with many trees. All the trees here were planted according to a specific pattern, and in the center was a huge pale golden oak. This was the sacred land in the forest. It was a place to worship the goddess of the forest and rangers, Melikai. This goddess did not have many temples, and her favorite altar was the sacred land in the forest. Often, there must be an oak tree near this altar. Melikai was the daughter of the father of the oak tree and the most powerful god of nature. However, because the father of the oak tree and Mother Earth had disappeared one after another, Melikai did not have much say in the natural god system. The goddess had been trying to regain control of nature for a long time, but this attempt was not very successful. She was best at the forest priesthood. "My lord." The human ranger knelt down on one knee and said respectfully, "Recently, a large number of magic spiders have appeared in the forest in the southwest. Their numbers are increasing, and they are reproducing quickly. I suspect that this is related to the drows in the Underdark. They seem to be planning to start a war with the surface elves. These minions of the Queen of Spiders are plotting something. Maybe we should try to stop them." In the center of the sacred land in the forest, a tall woman wearing exquisite green-brown leather armor turned around. She had an extremely beautiful appearance, but there was an indescribable heroic spirit about her. She was strong and beautiful. Melikai was a kind god with a sense of humor and always had a confident smile on her face. She was very cautious about making friends, but once she recognized them as friends, she would protect them eagerly and faithfully. Although she understood that death was also part of the cycle of life, she was not as indifferent as Sylvanus. Instead, she often intervened to heal the pain of creatures out of sympathy. This goddess had been guarding the forest. She was the goddess worshipped by the rangers. "What do you think?" Melikai turned around and looked at her side. An elegant golden unicorn was walking leisurely. After hearing Mei Likai's words, it raised its head and said in a clear voice, "It should be the Queen of Spiders' conspiracy. But the most important thing for us now is to protect the forest from being invaded by the undead. Presumably, the elf god system can deal with the Queen of Spiders' conspiracy. We just have to make sure that the demonized spiders don't spread to other forests." A faint golden radiance. The unicorn in front of him exuded a noble and elegant aura, and the ranger beside her quickly bowed to her upon seeing her. This was the unicorn goddess, Surue. She was Marikai's most loyal friend, companion, and mount. Urue loved to wander around, and her personality was a little capricious. However, once she believed that the other party was trustworthy, she would show her loyal friendship and would never abandon her believers who were in trouble. Iris would be a very difficult foe when she had to face a battle, but she loved the light banter, the clever puzzles, the strange discoveries, the delightful explorations of life. The unicorn goddess rarely managed the church, and her church was basically attached to Marikai's church. These two goddesses had a large number of ranger believers, and the priests would also part-time become rangers and droll. Among them, the priests and droll who believed in Marikai could use the ranger's weapon at will. This was a special ability given to them by the goddess, just like how Soren's priests could use curved swords. Marikai heard this and fell into deep thought. After a while, she looked up and said, "That's right. How are the dryads near the misty forest? Are they still not willing to merge with us?" The ranger gently shook his head. She thought for a moment and slowly said, "These dryads serve the father of the oak and believe that one day the father of the oak will return. But they seem to maintain a very close relationship with the Shadow Lord. The recovery of the entire misty forest is also closely related to this god." The Shadow Lord? The unicorn goddess heard this and showed an interesting expression. She whispered, "What kind of god is he?" To be able to become a mid-level god in such a short period of time, there is no doubt that he is a true powerhouse. I want to thank him in person for killing that bastard Mailer. The god of the hunt, Mailer. He was the most hated person of the forest by the unicorn goddess, and she didn't mind killing him. Similarly, Mailer was eager to taste the blood of the unicorn goddess. She had always been eager to see Soren and express her gratitude. But she was also Marikai's ally and mount. When the Avatar crisis broke out, she must protect Marikai. This goddess might not be powerful, but she couldn't be underestimated because the unicorn itself was a very powerful creature. Many of the gods of the dragons were weak, and it wasn't easy to fight them. Soren? Marikai's face showed a trace of curiosity and murmured, "He seems to be different from the other evil gods we have seen. He protected the south and rebuilt the order. Maybe we can meet him when we have the chance." Although the gods rarely moved around, they were not isolated from the news. Soren's reputation had spread throughout the multiverse, and even the oldest gods knew about him. Spider Forest. This was a forest ruled by spiders. In this huge forest, there lived a large number of poisonous spiders, phase spiders, shadow spiders, and so on. Now, there was a very terrible spider. That was the black spider, enchanted spider. This spider was more than 3 meters long and wide, with sharp teeth and poisonous fangs. They multiplied rapidly under the influence of some kind of power, and now there were countless of them. The elves were forced to withdraw from here. Now the whole spider forest was covered with white spider webs. The forest that stretched hundreds of meters was pale white. The spider webs covered everything and hunted all the creatures that entered here, including the wandering undead. The speed of reproduction of the enchanted spiders was quite amazing. Through the spider webs, one could see many enchanted spiders living in the cave. Occasionally, there were signs of activity, but there were thousands of them. Just a glance at them would make one's scalp tingle. Droll was monitoring here. The rangers were on guard. The nearby elves also felt uneasy, worried that these spiders would rush out and tear everything apart at any time. No one knew how many enchanted spiders there were. Since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the spiders here had been expanding rapidly. Now there were probably more than hundreds of thousands of them. No one knew where their food came from. Anyway, the number had not stopped growing. The nearby gnomes and dwarves had been forced to migrate, and even the ogres had been forced to escape. These spiders continued to cover the forest with spider webs, and they continued to expand toward the southwest. The area of the spider web was getting larger and larger, and eventually, it gradually approached the elven kingdom. This was a huge web made by the queen of spiders, Lolth. Looking at the whole multiverse, only she could control so many spiders. The drows in the Underdark seemed to be lurking, but the huge group of spiders was constantly expanding, and the twisted spider elves were becoming more and more common. Not only were the drows corrupted, but even the surface elves were turned into spider elves by some kind of secret method. This was the power of crafty approach. From the beginning, the queen of spiders, Lolth, had been constantly collecting the power of crafty approach, and now her giant web had officially taken shape. This giant web wrapped around the elven kingdom from all directions. But at the same time, because of the large number of spiders, the original ecological system of the material plane was seriously damaged, and she also aroused the vigilance and hostility of the goddess of the forest, Marikai. Motor City. Soren was tidying up everything in the study. After stealing the soul of Styx, his strength was increasing every minute. The demon army was expanding. The army of heroic spirits was growing. Soren was constantly accumulating power. This power must ensure that he could stand firm among the gods with great divine power, and this could not be done by the golem puppets alone. Brother! Brother! Right at this moment, an extremely excited voice sounded. Two identical Vivian, one black and one white, rushed into the room excitedly. "We've finally succeeded," Vivian said in a crisp voice. Vivian and Lillian. After such a long time, they finally adapted to the changes of the gods under the guidance of Soren and successfully completed the transformation of prayer and magic. Congratulations. Soren smiled and hugged them. Vivian smiled and enjoyed Soren's hug. She was wearing a white princess dress. After she raised her head and kissed Soren's cheek, she suddenly seemed to think of something and said, "Oh, brother. Recently, Lulu's situation has been a bit strange. Can you go and see her?" Soren raised his head and asked, "Lulu? What's wrong with her?" Lillian answered, "She seems to be a little uncomfortable recently. She used to be alive and kicking every day. But recently, her spirit has been low, and she seems to be unable to speak." Soren frowned and said, "Okay. Let's go and see." Lulu lived next door to Vivian. With the increase of Mordor's strength, the battles that required her to participate in personally had decreased a lot. Speaking of which, Soren hadn't seen her for a while. Inside the room, Soren soon saw Lulu, who was in low spirits. When he saw Lulu in front of him, Soren's eyes immediately lit up, and he said in a deep voice, "When did this happen to her?" "About a week ago," Vivian whispered from the side. Soren frowned and walked over, reached out and pressed Lulu's forehead, and murmured, "Can you hear me? Did you come into contact with any god some time ago?" Meow. Lulu opened her eyes with difficulty as if she hadn't slept for a long time. She muttered to herself, "Did I? I don't remember." After that, she fell asleep again. Vivian's expression suddenly became nervous. She had always had a close relationship with Lulu. She said anxiously, "Brother. What happened to Lulu?" Soren's face was solemn. He turned and glanced at the little girl, and said coldly, "Someone, God, wants to use her to be reborn. She was planted with a seed of divinity." Chapter 1031. Soren's face was very ugly. He was surrounded by a cold murderous aura, and Vivian and Lillian could not help but hold Soren's hand nervously. For a long time, Soren cared about the people around him very much. Although Lulu's status in Mordor was not high, she was one of the first people to enter the core circle. She was Vivian's partner and maid, and Soren had long recognized her as an important part. And such a core member, and an underage girl, was now secretly planted with a divine seed and became a tool for the resurrection of the gods. This was simply challenging Soren's bottom line. Soren suddenly had a few suspects in his mind. He turned to Vivian and said, "You go out first. I want to find out who planted the divine seed in Lulu." Vivian and Lillian went out obediently. Divine form. Then, Soren's whole body was shrouded in golden light. He directly reached out and pressed on Lulu's forehead, and then his spirit invaded her mind in an instant. 3 divine powers appeared in front of Soren's eyes. The first one was from the Lady of Silvermoon. This was the power of divine blessing, and it was directly added to Lulu. The second one was from Vivian. This was the power of blessing. The little girl gave a trace of divinity to Lulu after getting the power of the divine title of fear, wanting to help her become a demigod. The third one was the most hidden, and it was wrapped around Lulu's soul. The problem was the third divine power. Lulu herself did not know about this divine power, and it was secretly planted at some time. Rather than a gift, it was more like a trick and a curse. Its function was to use Lulu's soul and body as nourishment for rebirth, when a certain existence died. The goddess of cat and dance. Soren gritted his teeth and said these words, and then his face became very ugly. To ensure her safety, he had even informed the goddess of love to bring her back. However, it seemed that the goddess of the chaos faction did not appreciate his kindness at all. She had planted a divine seed in Lulu's body. She wanted to use Lulu as a resurrection tool in the future. First of all, Lulu was a very talented feline girl. Secondly, cats were very compatible with the goddess of dance's priesthood. Soren was sure that before she was taken away, she had secretly contacted Lulu and used some secret method to leave a seed in Lulu's body. This goddess probably had a secret plan, but looking at the situation of the seed being activated now, it was obvious that she had a plan. Something seemed to have happened to the cat and dance goddess. Serves you right. Soren smiled coldly as he sent his divine energy into Lulu's soul. You won't die if you don't ask for it. Something had actually happened to him after he was brought back by the goddess of love. Looks like even the heavens can't save you. This time. Soren's remaining friendliness towards the cat and dance goddess disappeared. He did not hesitate to transform into his divine form. First, he erased the divinity given by the Silver Moon Lady, then suppressed the divinity given by Vivian. Finally, he extracted Lulu's soul and carefully removed the seed of divinity. The cat and dance goddess's divine power level was much lower than Soren's, so removing the seed of divinity was not difficult. However, after thinking of something, Soren stopped and suppressed the seed of divinity instead. High Priest. Soren stopped all of this and turned his divine sense to the temple. Immediately send someone to find out about the goddess of love and the cat and dance goddess. Yes, my lord. The high priestess voice rang out. Soren let go of his hand and walked out of the door. Vivian and Lillian were waiting anxiously outside. When they saw him come out, they asked, "How is Lulu?" "She's fine for now." Soren nodded and said, "Maybe it's a blessing in disguise." Since the cat and dance goddess did not have a bottom line and dared to attack his people, they could not blame Soren for being merciless. If the cat and dance goddess were really dead, Soren would never resurrect her. Not only would he not resurrect the cat and dance goddess, he would also use the seed of divinity left by the cat and dance goddess and transfer her divinity to Lulu. This was something that was very likely to succeed. Under normal circumstances, the medium of a god's resurrection must have a special requirement. Many gods put the medium of resurrection on their chosen ones. Since Lulu was left with a seed of divinity, it meant that she could become the medium of a god's resurrection and inherit the divinity of the cat and dance goddess. In this way, Soren only needed to destroy the souls of the cat and dance goddess during the resurrection process, and then the divinity would be automatically transferred to Lulu. For Soren, who had the divinity of slaughter and death, this was at least 70% certain. Time passed little by little. In the afternoon, the high priest sent over a piece of information and a video. It was a land full of holes, and it looked like it had been bombed by missiles. The high priest said calmly, "There is no news about the cat and dance goddess at the moment. But just yesterday, the goddess of love and lady of night fought in the northwest wilderness. The two powerful goddesses flattened more than 10 mountains in the battle, and the shockwaves of their divinity turned everything within 10 kilometers into ruins." Sure enough, the cat and dance goddess was finally in trouble. This goddess had fallen into the trap of Lady of Night before and almost died. At that time, she was pulled back by the goddess of love, but now it seemed that she could not hold back her desire to die, and finally, something happened. She would not die if she did not seek death. Her chaotic nature seemed to make her like to try dangerous things, and now it seemed that she was about to die. The reason why she was not completely dead yet was that she had a backup plan. She still had her seed of divinity in Lulu. If Soren did not notice anything unusual, the goddess would soon occupy Lulu's body and soul, and eventually take over Lulu's memory and body without anyone knowing. Finally, she would replace and lurk around Soren. Humph. Soren waved his hand and put away the video. He turned to Vivian and said, "Protect me. I want to completely eliminate Lulu's hidden dangers." Soren no longer had any sympathy for the cat and dance goddess. He went straight into the room and hugged Lulu's petite body in his arms, then sat down cross-legged and put Lulu on his knees. He then lowered his head and put his forehead on Lulu's forehead. Astral projection. A pale golden shadow of the soul emerged from Soren's body, and then turned into a stream of light and went into Lulu's body. The next moment, an empty spiritual space appeared, just like the battlefield that Soren had entered, where Vivian's soul was trapped. The Dread Lord also used a spiritual space to trap Vivian's soul, which caused the little girl to sleep for a long time. Now, the cat and dance goddess used the same method, but the difference was that Soren saw the sleeping Lulu. Her spiritual energy was far inferior to Vivian's. "Who?" A female voice with a hint of horror sounded, and then a charming and tall figure appeared. The cat and dance goddess, Sharius. The goddess controlled the domain of charm and had a very charming face, but at the moment, she was a little pale because she knew that all her plans had been exposed when she saw Soren. From the first time she saw Lulu, she noticed the amazing talent of this little cat girl. Because of the Avatar crisis, she secretly left a backup plan in Lulu. With the help of Lulu's innate closeness to her, she planted a seed of divine power in Lulu. The purpose was that if something happened to her in the future, she could use Lulu to be resurrected. As long as the Avatar crisis was over, even if her identity was exposed, Soren would not be able to do anything to her. "It's you." Soren's expression was cold. With a wave of his hand, a silver-white stream of light turned into a curved sword. He looked at Sharius in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Cat and dance goddess. You dare to attack my people. Aren't you being too audacious?" Shadow. Shadow Lord. The cat and dance goddess, Sharius looked at Soren, who was approaching step by step. Her pretty face was very pale, and she hurriedly said, Don't do it. I'm willing to surrender to you. Think about it. She's just an ordinary cat girl. He's just a mortal. As long as you are willing to help me resurrect, I'm willing to make a Styx oath to be loyal to you. I'm willing to surrender to you. I'm willing to give you everything I have. I can even become your servant. Isn't this more valuable than the cat girl in front of me? The cat and dance goddess, Sharius, was very clear about this. That was, she had absolutely no chance of winning against Soren. She was just a weak divine power, and Soren was an intermediate divine power. Soren's rise was from a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, and he had already killed a lot of gods. And none of her divine titles were combat, so once she fought, she would be completely crushed. Sharius did not hesitate to put out her biggest bargaining chip. In her eyes, Lulu was just a mortal, and she was a goddess. Whether it was value or beauty, she was far more valuable than the little cat girl in front of her. As long as Soren was a smart evil god, he should know which was more valuable, a goddess who surrendered to him or a mortal cat girl who was more valuable. Sharius tried her best to show her beauty and charm, and she also showed a pitiful look. She believed that no evil god would reject a beautiful goddess like her. But Soren faced this temptation that was full of benefits, and he just calmly said, "I refuse. You have already crossed my bottom line." A cold light flashed. Along with the surging divine power, Soren's territory directly broke through the spiritual dimension, and at the same time, it turned into a golden light and slashed towards the soul of the cat and dance goddess in front of him. It was not like Soren had never played with a goddess before. If the cat and dance goddess thought that this could make Soren give up on Lulu and choose her, she was too naive. Chapter 1032. No. Along with the cat and dance goddess Shari's screams of despair, Soren's divine power tore everything apart without hesitation. The difference between a minor divine power and a lesser divine power was about 3 times, and the difference between a lesser divine power and an intermediate divine power was also about 3 times. Soren's strength was close to that of a greater divine power, and he could even fight the goddess of love head-on. How could the cat and dance goddess Shari's in front of him withstand Soren's divine power? A cold voice rang out, "Killed cat and dance goddess Shari's. Extracting target's soul energy. You've received 150000 slaughter EXP. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've received 8 divinity. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've received 6 divinity. Target has the chaos, charm, kindness, travel, and trickery domains. Trickery domain compatibility 85%. Extracting target's trickery domain. Your trickery domain has been upgraded." As the cat and dance goddess Shari's soul completely dissipated, a wave of divine power also entered Soren's soul. However, this goddess was too weak. Moreover, she seemed to have been killed by the Lady of the Night, and Soren received very little divine power from her. Lulu meow. Soren turned around and looked at Lulu, who was gradually waking up. Her expression was a little confused, but her mind had recovered, and all her memories had been recalled. Shari's controlled the charm domain, and with the help of the cat divine title, she had charmed Lulu's soul from the beginning, making her completely under her control. If not for Lulu's strong consciousness, she would have been devoured long ago. "Master, meow." The little cat girl cleverly got up and rubbed against Soren's clothes to show her affection. Soren reached out and stroked Lulu's little head, then said, "Relax. Open your spiritual domain. I'll help you take over Shari's divine title." Lulu meow did a meditative action, but she didn't fully understand. She had absolute trust in Soren, especially after she recalled everything that had happened. Divine spark extraction. Soren stretched out his hand and grabbed at the air. The divine power that had dissipated when he killed the cat and the dancing goddess, Shari's, instantly gathered. Then, Soren said in a deep voice, "Be patient. Fuse with these energies. You can do it." Soren collected all the divinity from the goddess of dance, Shari's. He then controlled the divinity and infused it into Lulu's body. The crafty approach had already been absorbed by Soren. However, as a god with weak divine power, Karis still had many other powers. Her clergy included cats, dance, hedonism, sensory enjoyment, and large-scale joyful celebrations. Apart from crafty approach, Karis's domain also included chaos, charm, kindness, and travel. Lulu meow couldn't absorb all of the godhood, but she could fuse with some of it. A golden light appeared. The first power that Lulu meow fused with was the clergy, cat. She was a cat girl herself, and her compatibility with this clergy was far better than anyone else. However, Lulu meow's starting point was still too low. It seemed that except for the cat clergy, there was no way to accept the other clergies. Instead, they were transferred to other gods with similar clergy. Then came the power of the domain. Lulu Meow successfully fused the domain of charm and dance. At the same time, the sensory enjoyment was also fused. Then, she absorbed a little power of large-scale joyful celebrations. Finally, there was a little bit of chaos and travel. At the same time. Just as Soren finished all this, a golden light suddenly flew from the sky and fell directly into Lulu Meow's body. Divinity from the sky. This was the divine power that dissipated when the dancing goddess, Cherise, died. Under the guidance of Soren, the most important, cat, clergy was integrated into Lulu Meow's body. In the room. Soren quickly opened his eyes, and Lulu Meow also woke up. Brother. Brother. The two little girls appeared in the room, and then Gloria came in. It was impossible for her not to notice such a big thing. Lulu? Vivian walked over and reached out to touch Lulu Meow's head. She turned around and said, "Brother. Is she okay?" Soren smiled and nodded. "Yes. But we can call her, Cat Maiden, from now on." The dancing goddess, Cherise, was known as the dancing goddess and the mother of cats. Lulu Meow inherited part of her clergy and power. Now, she should be called, Cat Maiden. Gloria gave Soren a look. So, Soren left Vivian and Lulu Meow behind and followed Gloria out. "Is she okay?" Gloria asked softly. Soren nodded and said, "I have erased Cherise's will. Now, Lulu Meow has inherited the clergy of Cat. At the same time, she has mastered the domain of charm and dance." Gloria heard this and sighed in relief. She then said, "So she has become a god? What a lucky little girl." Soren shook his head. Then, he slowly said, "Lulu Meow is at most a demigod with a clergy. But it will be easy for her to become a god in the future. She has a close relationship with Vivian. In the future, she will be Vivian's subordinate." No matter what, Vivian was an intermediate god. Gods of this level should have one or two subordinate gods. Lulu Meow was undoubtedly the most suitable. "Brother." After making sure Lulu Meow was okay, Vivian quickly came out. At this time, Soren also turned around and said seriously, "Vivian. Lulu Meow now has the clergy of Cat. You, as her master, have the responsibility and obligation to teach her how to become a god. From today on, she is your subordinate god. You need to teach her how to be a true god." Fate really gave Lulu Meow a big gift. Soren had a hard time becoming a god, but Lulu Meow didn't expect to be a blessing in disguise. She directly became a demigod. Although this was thanks to Soren, it was also her own luck. If she wasn't a cat girl, Cherise would never pay attention to her. If she wasn't a servant of Vivian, Soren wouldn't care so much about her. For this reason, Soren even gave up Cherise's loyalty and chose to support Lulu Meow to become a new goddess. Now, there were already two demigod candidates in the whole city of Mordor. One was Saruman, and the other was Lulu Meow. In addition, Gloria gradually mastered the clergy of prophecy. Vivian and Lillian were mid-level gods, and Soren also controlled a maiden of pain. At present, everything he had was close to the scale of a god. At the same time, after Lulu Meow got the clergy of Cat, Soren also had some new ideas. Because in the belief of the earth in his previous life, black cats played a special role in the Egyptian god system. They were inextricably linked to the underworld and evil spirits. Soren controlled death and slaughter, and Vivian controlled fear and strife. These were all extensions of the death god system. Lulu Meow's existence could make up for part of it in the future. Inside a magnificent divine temple, a woman with fiery red hair and an unusually beautiful face was sitting on the throne of the temple. She opened her eyes as if she sensed something and looked at the sky. A dim star was falling. Sigh. The fiery-haired lady let out a soft sigh and then murmured, "Is this your final outcome?" The goddess of love also felt very helpless because this god was too difficult to control. She was not as obedient as the goddess of joy. Most of the time, her orders did not work at all. She had already fallen into the hands of the Lady of Night, but after bringing her back from Mordor, Sharius still could not control her nature. If a god was controlled by nature, then they had lost their essence. Lady of Fire. With a golden light, the figure of the goddess of joy appeared. She sighed and said, "It seems that Sharius has completely fallen. Are we going to take revenge on the Lady of Night?" The goddess of love shook her head slowly. Then, she whispered, "I can feel that the Lady of Night is weaving some conspiracy. She and the Queen of Spiders have joined forces. We can't act rashly. Let's wait for the Lady of Silvermoon to prepare everything. Mistress should be recovering soon. When the goddess of magic fully recovers, it will be time for us to take revenge for her." No matter what, Sharius was her god, and the Lady of Night had to pay the price for her repeated schemes. Otherwise, the other gods would completely despise her and think that the goddess of love was just a useless vase. Killing a god was a very serious provocation to the main gods. The plague was still spreading, and the power of death was getting stronger and stronger. Everything brewing in the material plane seemed to be accumulating, waiting for the moment to completely explode. P.S. Volume 9 ends here. Tomorrow will be Volume 10. The last wave of the undead disaster will also begin. The gods will once again compete for the ownership of the god of death, and any winner will directly be promoted to a greater divine power. Naruto, who has been plotting for a long time, Clemvox, who has disappeared, the goddess of death and magic from another world, the god of murder who broke through the seal, the god of lich who is barely alive, the lord of the undead in the abyss, and the lord of the undead in the lower planes. Everyone who is qualified to compete for the god of death is preparing. Soren, who has the power of death and slaughter, is also waiting for an opportunity. Chapter 1033. Am I going to die? The bonfire could not dispel the chill in his body. Zoe held his brother tightly in his arms. Hunger had made him lose most of his physical strength, but at this moment, he still held his 10-year-old brother tightly under his body, closed his eyes and waited for the pain of being bitten. Maybe death is relief, Zoe thought. He could feel his young brother shivering. He tried to comfort his brother, but he did not know what to say. He could only murmur, "I'll see my father and mother soon." The expected pain did not come. There was a scream in the darkness, followed by the sound of something falling to the ground. Huh! A slender figure appeared in the darkness. He frowned and glanced at the ghoul in front of him, who had been killed by an arrow. Then he glanced at Zoe and said, "Captain. There are 2 living people here. They were saved." Zoe opened his eyes in surprise. There was still a trace of despair and ecstasy on his face. He turned around and saw a dead body. It was an extremely ugly ghoul, who used to be his companion. His name was Zinov, from Southwind County, and he used to be a coachman. The ghoul's limbs were very slender, and the skin on his head was sunken. It seemed that he had been in a state of hunger for a long time. The only special feature was his stomach. This ghoul's stomach was bulging high, as if a stone had been stuffed into it. This feature also appeared on Zoe and his young brother. Without exception, their stomachs were a little bulging because they did not store food in their stomachs, but bark, grass roots, leather, and even some kind of soft soil. These foods, which were extremely difficult to digest, could temporarily resist hunger, but could not supplement the nutrients they needed. Their former companions fell one after another. Many people, including his father and mother, had become ghouls because of hunger and torture when they were alive. They were refugees living in the wilderness. They heard that the south coast was rich and stable, and hoped to cross the wilderness to reach the Wind Spear Hills. Here. The young rogue threw a small package over, but his eyes were still vigilant. Eat something first. There was food. Zoe's eyes lit up as he rushed over. He took out the black bread and took a bite. The familiar taste made him cry. He hadn't eaten real food for a long time. As if thinking of something, he quickly broke off a small piece of bread, put it in his mouth and chewed a few times. Then, he took it out and put it in front of his weak brother, and whispered, "Joey. There was food. Bread, hurry up and eat some. You'll have more strength. Water." The rogue's eyes softened a little when he saw Soren's action, and then he threw a kettle over. In the wastelands, he had seen many refugees who had completely lost their humanity and reason. The young man in front of him was much better than most he had seen. "Are there any survivors?" A middle-aged man with a cold expression appeared, followed by two shining soldiers. The middle-aged man glanced at Zoe and asked, "Have you checked her?" The young rogue shook his head. The middle-aged man glanced at them and said in a deep voice, "Prepare some food for them." Then he would take it to the temple and hand it over to the priest. "The whole area has been infected by the plague." After that, he whispered to the person next to him, "Send them away now. Be careful that they become ghouls on the way." "You." Zoe regained a lot of strength after eating. He looked up at the man in front of him in awe. Suddenly, he seemed to recognize something and said in surprise, "You. Are you from Mordor City?" The middle-aged man nodded, but he did not pay attention to the young man. He still had a lot to do. The nearby water sources were polluted. Many starving refugees only needed a little bit of death power to turn into ghouls. Some of the first batches of people he received became ghouls on the way. Not only did they kill many refugees, but even 3 of his men were killed. These were all good men from Mordor City. The middle-aged man's face was full of pain at the thought of this. The strength of the guards in the Wind Spear Hill was too weak. He brought 12 people from Mordor City. He did not expect that a mistake would kill a quarter of them. Those damn ghouls. The young rogue saw that Zoe had recovered a little and came over. He said in a deep voice, "How many people do you have left?" Zoe thought for a moment and said, "Some fell behind. We encountered a group of goblins on the way. Some have become man-eating monsters. I don't know. There were more than 100 people when we set off. Now only the 2 of us are still alive." The young rogue was silent. At this time, Zoe noticed that the other party had pointed ears. This was a half-elf rogue. "Come with me." The rogue did not seem to be interested in talking. He said in a deep voice, "I will take you to a safe place first." The food gave Zoe some strength, and his words filled Zoe with hope. Zoe helped her younger brother up and staggered after him. Along the way, although the rogue in front of them was leading the way, he kept a distance from them, and there was a trace of vigilance in his eyes. Zoe did not know why, but he could guess that maybe he was afraid that he would suddenly become one of those man-eating monsters. Zoe had seen many of those man-eating monsters. They were called ghouls. Including Zoe's parents, they also became these monsters after death. He still remembered the scene at that time. If the adventurer and the team had not killed it, his parents would have bitten him and his brother to death. Hunger tortured their souls and wills, and when death came, many people became undead. "Captain." A tall woman came out of the night. She said to the middle-aged man in front of her, "There are no living people in front of us. The rest have all become ghouls, and those who have not become ghouls have also been eaten." The middle-aged man's eyes were calm, and he said in a deep voice, "Get ready to clean up. This is an important route to the Wind Spear Hills. We can't let ghouls occupy this place. Inform the Dark Blade Guards to prepare for action. The order given by Mordor City is to clean it up within 3 days." "Yes." The woman bowed and disappeared into the night. The wind was howling. The middle-aged man shook his head and sighed. He murmured, "I have been staying in Mordor City, and I don't feel anything about the outside world. I didn't expect that the once rich South has become a hell on earth." On the way, they passed through several villages and towns, which were all gnawed bones. "Get ready to move." There was no point in sighing. Their mission could not be delayed for too long. Zoe was in a daze all the way. He didn't know how long he had been walking and stopping. In the end, his whole consciousness was blurred. When he recovered, the first thing he saw was a middle-aged priest in a white robe. The priest smiled at him gently, and then said to the rogue next to him, "It's okay now. The plague has been dispelled. Take him back for a comprehensive disinfection, and then send him to the resettlement camp." Zoe turned his head and saw his sleeping brother. Then fatigue hit him, and he fell into a deep sleep again. In a daze, he felt as if he was transported to a carriage, and then he was half awake in the bumpy ride. When he fully recovered, he had come to a hut that stretched for more than 10 miles. Name? Birthplace? How old are you? What relatives do you have? The man who looked like an official with a cold expression asked him a few words, and then handed him and his brother to a group of soldiers. There seemed to be a lot of people like them. Thousands of people were escorted forward. Some looked confused, and some were full of hope. They walked like this for the whole morning until a green field appeared in front of them. Wheat field? Zoe opened his mouth in surprise. It was winter, and there shouldn't be wheat fields. Even winter wheat should have just been sown. There was a burst of exclamations. But soon they were urged forward by the soldiers. They had escorted many people, and every time there was a burst of exclamations, and they had long been tired of it. Look at those people. Those people are droll. Next to Zoe, a small man whispered, "Legend has it that they have the power to make the earth grow again." Some droll appeared near the wheat field, and there were many farmers busy nearby. They occasionally looked up and then lowered their heads to work. The temperature nearby seemed to have begun to rise. After passing through the fortress, Zoe felt much warmer. At noon, Zoe and others arrived at their destination, which was a medium-sized town. They were placed in the south. Those with special skills were selected, and those without special skills were gathered near the farmhouse. That night, Zoe slept on the soft bed covered with hay. After a day of walking, Joey was sleepy, but he could still hear the faint sound of sobbing. He got up and walked to the window to look at the dark night sky, murmuring to himself. He didn't know what the future would be like. But now they were safe. His father and mother had passed away, but there was still a young brother alive. No matter what the future was, he could only persevere. The disaster had taken away too much from him, but hope also gave him the motivation to continue living. City Hall. A clerk-like man walked in quickly, and then said to Adele Isabella in her seat, "My lady. The 6th batch of refugees has been counted. The current population received is close to 200,000 people. Among them, 80,000 people have been settled in the southern towns, and now it is close to saturation. I'm afraid the rest of the population will have to be settled in the east and west." Adele Isabella raised her head and said softly, "Got it. How is the harvest of crops?" The clerk took out a book and looked at it, and quickly replied, "With the help of the Church of Agriculture, 1/3 of the land has been sowed. Droll has made some crops grow ahead of time, and the first batch of food is expected to be harvested next month. At present, according to the supply of Mordor City and the assistance of the Church of Agriculture, it can last for about half a year." Now, all the refugees in the south were gathering towards the Wind Spear Hills. Because Mordor City was far away in the outer islands, it was the least disturbed. Now it had become the biggest backer of the Wind Spear Hills. Whether it was materials or personnel, they could not do without the help of Mordor City. "Send this document to Mordor City." Adele Isabella picked up a document and handed it to the attendant next to her, and then said, "You can inform the temple to arrange for action." Population was faith. Most of the refugees in the Wind Spear Hills had been through a lot, and the gods they once believed in had become very weak. At this time, with a little guidance, Soren, who provided them with a new life, could harvest a large number of believers. New Moon Year 1677, early November. Just when the 7th batch of refugees was settled in the Wind Spear Hills, Soren, who was far away in Mordor City, suddenly seemed to have sensed something, and then he returned to his temple in an instant. A golden beam of light rose. With the automatic echoes of prayers around the temple, a huge amount of faith power gathered towards Soren's body. At the same time, this power also triggered the law energy that existed in the multiverse. In an instant, a new domain ability was mastered by Soren. A row of data appeared in front of him, ability upgrade. Faith conversion. You have recast a new order for the South Coast. During the chaotic period of the Avatar crisis, you have created the law of Mordor City. And you have re-established order in the chaotic South Coast. You have obtained some information about the order domain. Divinity conversion. You have obtained a new ability, the order domain. From now on, some believers in the order camp will be able to access your order domain and obtain new abilities. Divinity fell from the sky. A little golden light merged into Soren's body, bringing him 5 points of divinity and 5 points of divinity. At the same time, the faith power that shrouded the temple was quickly consumed and turned into a new domain ability that was mastered by Soren. The order in Mordor City did not bring about a real change, but when Soren brought the order to the South Coast, the quantitative change finally led to a qualitative change. Soren mastered the order domain that other gods could only obtain after hundreds of years. And to obtain this powerful domain, it would either take hundreds of years to obey the order, or it could only reshape the order in turmoil. Chapter 1034. The Emerald Forest. A fairyland surrounded by clouds and mist. It seemed to be isolated from the chaotic world. Even the disaster of the Avatar crisis did not affect this land because it was located in the depths of the Elven Kingdom and belonged to a group of very powerful creatures. They were the dragons. And they were the most powerful golden dragons among the metal dragons. Golden dragons liked to live near warm mountains. They maintained a friendly relationship with the elves. As they grew older, golden dragons would gradually turn from dark yellow to golden, and eventually, the color of their pupils would become lighter and lighter. At this moment, in the dragon's nest in this mountain, a golden dragon whose pupils had turned pure gold like melted gold was entrenched here. It was an old golden dragon that had lived in this mountain for thousands of years. It was a little different from other dragons. Golden dragons would slowly grow beards over time. The golden dragon in front of them had a beautiful golden beard, and it looked like a learned sage. Golden dragons were favored by luck. When a golden dragon was old enough, they would understand a trace of the power of luck. They could give themselves and nearby allies a bonus of luck through the gems embedded in their bodies. The golden dragon in front of them had many colorful gems embedded in its dragon scales. They were all masters of magic and were far better at magic than other dragons. Golden dragons were the favorite of the dragon god among the metal dragons. They were also the only ones among the metal dragons that could fight against red dragons head-on. Silver dragons were much weaker in this regard. Dracolic? At this moment, the old golden dragon in front of them had a dignified expression. He said to a beautiful woman in front of him, "Is someone trying to resurrect the Dracolic again? Who is it? Dragon cultists? The god of liches? Is he also the mastermind behind this?" Standing in front of the old golden dragon was Alexandrina, the silver dragon that Soren saved. She perfectly completed the task that Soren asked her to deliver the news of the Dracolica's appearance. The dragons hated the Dracolic very much. This hatred was beyond their attributes. When a metal dragon and a 5-color dragon encountered a Dracolic at the same time, they would most likely work together to send the Dracolic to the dragon's tomb. The dragon god also hated the Dracolic very much because this undead dragon had betrayed their faith. It was a form that the dragon god hated very much. "I see." The old golden dragon pondered for a moment and said slowly, "I'll send the news back to Dragon Island now. If the Lich god also interferes in this matter, it's not something we can deal with by ourselves. This matter must be reported to Lord Dragon God." The god of Lich himself held the divine title of Lich. If he were to resurrect the Dracolic, the chances of success would be very high. 1 or 2 gold and silver dragons were not enough to fight against the Dracolic, but because of the Avatar crisis, all the gods had fallen to the mortal world, and the dragon gods had also fallen to the material plane. However, they did not go to the mainland. Instead, they went to another place, Dragon Island. As mentioned earlier, many planes were attached to half-planes. Just like how the moon orbited the Earth, there were also half-planes attached to the material plane. There were even gods who had grafted their divine kingdoms onto the material plane. Dragon Island was such a special place. It was the habitat of the dragons, a space that was closed and outsiders were not allowed to enter. Its entrance was at the farthest end of the sea, and only a few people were lucky enough to enter it. It was an island country surrounded by the sea, and it was also a large half-plane attached to the dragons. Similarly, there was another larger country, and that was the legendary Dragon Country. This was a world that was difficult for mortals to reach, and it was also a shelter built by the dragon god for the dragons. The pentashade dragons, metal dragons, and gem dragons could all be found in the Dragon Country. The dragon god was on Dragon Island. He was very smart to avoid the struggle of the gods. As a dragon, he did not need the faith of other races. Even the dragon itself needed very little faith, so the dragon god did not need to be involved in the battle of the Avatar crisis. The Order of the South Coast brought Soren a new domain power. This was a powerful force, and at the same time, it also gave Soren an additional ability, which was to endow the land and the plane with the Order attribute. If Soren wanted, he could also turn a land in the bottomless abyss into an evil one. Of course, this would consume a lot of divine power. Soren was not yet ready to fight against the bottomless abyss. He still needed to quietly accumulate power. However, while Soren was constantly stealing souls in the river Styx, good news from the Sigil City was also sent back. The Fallen Witch had obtained the nucleus of the Mies. However, at the same time, the other party also made a very serious request. This request was made to Soren, but because the gods could not enter the Sigil City, the news was passed to Soren by the High Priest. These survivors of the Arcane Empire hoped to get the support of Soren. The destruction of the Arcane Empire was inseparable from the gods. One of these survivors of the Arcane Empire defeated another revenge party, and they thought that they should draw a powerful god as their backing and restore the glory of the Arcane Empire. Soren was their target. He was a newly ascended and powerful deity who was also curious and fond of arcane magic. Moreover, his woman was a witch. Note, these survivors of the Arcane Empire mistakenly believed that the Fallen Witch was Soren's intimate partner. The Fallen Witch did not deny this, and used this to prove her worth. The Arcane Empire? Soren stood at the top of the tower and pondered. He said to himself, "It's absolutely impossible to restore the original Arcane Empire. I can't go to war with the gods for the nucleus of the Mies. And the Arcane Empire used too much energy in the past. If it wasn't for the self-sacrifice of the Oak Father, I'm afraid that the material plane would have been destroyed. The Arcane Empire's civilization can be learned from, but it was too extreme in many aspects. Civilization must be controlled by power. It's good to use it for the people's lives, but if it's arrogant enough to challenge the gods, it must be completely destroyed. If it wasn't for the research of the neutron star golem, the Arcane Empire would not have been destroyed so quickly. This kind of golem that could threaten the gods' kingdom was not tolerated by the gods. After all, Soren had learned some secrets after being a god for so long. In order to break free from the shackles of the Fate Tablet, the gods once conspired together to fight against a very powerful existence, and Jurgil was one of them. This matter was related to the retirement of some ancient gods. Then, the Arcane Empire completely broke with the gods for some reason, and finally led to the sudden collapse of the Arcane Empire. As a god, Soren had to protect the power of the gods. He had the ambition to be above the gods, but he would never think that it was a good thing for the mortals to dare to challenge the gods. If he had been a god in that era, he would probably have stood on the side of the gods to destroy the Arcane Empire. The gods maintained the order of the multiverse. Although the civilization of the Arcane Empire was powerful, once it was out of control, it would bring terrible destruction. History had proved that the gods had maintained the normal development of the multiverse for hundreds of millions of years. Whether it was the arrival of the first demons or the emergence of the psychic monster empire, the gods had balanced everything in the multiverse, and many of them had died in battle. Although they had great power, the gods also fulfilled the obligations brought by their priesthood. More importantly, unless the Avatar crisis broke out, the gods rarely intervened in the material plane. I can help them. Soren pondered for a long time, and slowly said, but only to restore the civilization, not to challenge the gods. There is no second father of the oak in this world. If that kind of disaster happens again, the world will completely wither. And I will also face the judgment of the gods. Let them hand over the nucleus of the Mies, and I will secretly help them rebuild the arcane civilization, but they must also remember not to cross the boundary of the gods. The entire arcane civilization was born with the help of the magic net. The magic net was under the control of the goddess of magic. A civilization that relied on the magic net and was born with the power of a powerful goddess was indeed crazy to try to challenge the most ancient gods. Rebuilding the civilization was a long process. Even with the remnants of the arcane empire, the huge resources needed to build a floating space city would take decades or even hundreds of years. Soren needed this time. As long as the Avatar crisis was over, other things could be dealt with later. Even as a god, Soren spent a lot of money to build a floating space city. The Arcane Empire had more than 10 floating space cities in its heyday, which was the accumulation of thousands of years of civilization. Even with the help of Soren, it was difficult for them to build a floating space city in decades. As for challenging the Divine Kingdom, even a weak divine power would need 2 or 3 floating space cities. Civilization was a good thing for all races. But the ambition to challenge the gods was not a good thing. If Soren found the signs, he would not hesitate to extinguish it. Yes. My lord. The voice of the high priest came. Since Soren had agreed. Then the fallen which could promise the remnants of the arcane empire. The core of the Mies was the key to building a floating space city. They only had the last one in their hands, and it was very difficult to make a new one after handing it over. Because these cores of the Mies were created by wizards with a level of 35 and above. At present, there was no such powerful arcanist among them. Maybe these people could build a floating space tower, but to build a floating space city, there had to be 1 or 2 arcanists above level 35. The important reason why the Arcane Empire dared to challenge the gods was that there were many wizards above level 35 and legendary figures above level 40 at that time. Unfortunately, these powerful spellcasters eventually disappeared. For Soren, as long as he got the core of the Mies, it was only a matter of time before the Mordor city rose. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.